The radio frequency had been classified, buried, erased from every military database after 17 soldiers vanished using it 6 years ago. Nobody was supposed to know it existed, but Captain Adrian Keller was watching his men die in a frozen trench, enemy forces closing from 3 sides, ammunition running to zero, and he had nothing left. So he opened the dead frequency. Echo 7, if anyone is listening, we need help. Static. Then, a voice. Female. Calm as ice over a grave. Echo 7 listening. Who needs me? Every soldier in that trench stopped breathing, because they had just called something the military had tried to erase from history, and it had answered. If this story pulls you in, stay with me until the very end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story can travel. The storm came without mercy. It didn't build slowly the way storms were supposed to, announcing themselves with distant thunder, darkening skies, a drop in pressure you could feel in your teeth. This one simply arrived, the way violence arrives in war, without introduction, without apology, without the decency of warning. 1 hour ago, Firebase Kestrel had been a functioning forward operating base. 43 soldiers, 2 mortar teams, a hardened command post built into the eastern slope of the Grevik Ridge, and enough ammunition to hold a defensive perimeter for 72 hours. That was what the mission brief had said. 72 hours of defensive capacity. The brief had been wrong. The defensive line collapsed in 53 minutes, not because the soldiers were unprepared, not because they fought poorly. They fought with everything they had, every round, every grenade, every desperate suppressive burst from positions that were already being flanked before the first contact report even reached the duty officer. They fought the way men fight when they understand, somewhere deep below conscious thought, that losing means dying. They lost anyway. Now what remained of Keller's unit occupied a shallow communications trench 200 meters east of the firebase's burned skeleton, in a depression in the frozen earth that offered approximately nothing in the way of tactical advantage. The trench was 3 feet deep in most places, choked with snow, and smelled of cordite and copper and the particular chemical odor of fear sweat in sub-zero temperatures. 18 soldiers crammed into a space designed for 8. 4 of them couldn't walk without help. 2 of them couldn't walk at all. Corporal Diaz was using his forearm as a tourniquet for the soldier next to him. He'd been doing it for 11 minutes. His arm had gone numb 7 minutes ago. Keller. His voice was flat. No panic left in it. Just information. Hendricks is going into shock. Captain Adrian Keller pressed himself against the frozen dirt wall of the trench and did not look up. Through the smoke and driving snow, he was processing every piece of information his senses could collect simultaneously. The direction of the last muzzle flash, the interval between the mortar rounds, the angle of approach of the shadows moving through the storm to the northwest. Enemy forces. At least 40, possibly more. Moving in disciplined bounds, cover to cover through the whiteout conditions, using the storm the way experienced soldiers use terrain. Keep pressure on it, Keller said. I know how to keep pressure on it. Then keep doing it. Sergeant First Class Torres crawled up beside him, belly in the snow, rifle across her forearms. She had a streak of someone else's blood drying across her left cheek. She didn't seem to know it was there, or she'd decided it didn't matter. Either was possible with Torres. Radio check, she said quietly. Still nothing. Command should have... I know what command should have done. Keller's jaw was tight. They should have answered 20 minutes ago when we reported the firebase going hot. They should have answered 15 minutes ago when I declared emergency. They should have answered 10 minutes ago when I gave them a CASEVAC request for 4 urgent surgical. Torres said nothing. The storm is killing the signal, Keller continued. Or the repeater on Grevik went down when the firebase burned. Or he stopped. Or something else. He didn't say the third option out loud. Not yet. Not in front of the others. Torres read his silence the way she'd learned to read it over 14 months of working alongside him. She lowered her voice further, barely above a whisper under the wind. Or command already knows what happened here, and they're not answering on purpose. Keller looked at her. She held his gaze. We need to talk about extraction routes, he said. There are no extraction routes. Torres gestured toward the tree line with 2 fingers. Alpha sector. Enemy movement confirmed. 30 meters. Bravo sector. I lost visual on Kowalski's fire team 6 minutes ago. No contact since, presumed compromised. Charlie sector. She paused. Charlie sector is where the mortars are coming from. Keller looked at the trench. 18 soldiers. 4 who couldn't run. 2 who couldn't move. Approximately 40 rounds of rifle ammunition remaining per man, which sounded like enough until you calculated the force multiplier of 40 enemy troops with armored support. It wasn't enough. A mortar round detonated 30 meters to their left, close enough that the shockwave punched through the air like a physical thing. Snow and frozen earth rained down. Someone cursed. A wounded soldier made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "What about the old recon net?" Diaz said from behind them. Keller turned. Diaz had his eyes on Hendricks, watching the man's chest rise and fall with the shallow irregularity of early shock, but his voice was calm and specific in a way that meant he'd been thinking about this for a while. "What about it?" Keller said. "Before we shipped out, Martinez, the old comms sergeant, before Martinez got rotated stateside, he told me something." Diaz paused. "He said there's a frequency that command sealed off. Old recon band, pre-digital era. Said it was classified after some kind of incident. But the hardware we're running, the PRC-117s, they can still physically access it. It just requires a manual frequency override." Silence in the trench. Only the wind and the distant percussion of enemy movement. "A sealed frequency," Torres said, her voice entirely neutral, conveying everything. He said sometimes people use it, off-grid, people who don't want to be found. Diaz shrugged, a small, careful movement. He said the call sign was Echo 7. Keller looked at the radio handset in his grip. The PRC-117G. 12 pounds of encrypted tactical communications hardware, currently producing nothing but white noise on every authorized channel. "You're telling me we should try a ghost frequency because a comm sergeant told you a story," Torres said. "I'm telling you we have no ammunition, 4 guys who can't run, a storm that's eating our radio, and 40 enemy soldiers about to walk over us." Diaz finally looked up from Hendricks. His eyes were steady. "I'm out of better ideas, are you?" Torres opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at Keller. Keller looked at the handset. A mortar round landed 20 meters away, closer than the last one. The ranging shots were getting tighter. Whoever was coordinating that fire knew exactly where they were. Exactly. The thought dropped into Keller's mind like a stone into still water. They know exactly where we are. He filed it. Not the time. "Walk me through the frequency override, but then," he said to Diaz. It took 4 minutes to manually reprogram the frequency band on the PRC-117G, which was 4 minutes of Corporal Chen hunched over the radio housing with a multi-tool in the dark, while mortar rounds walked steadily toward their position. Chen was the closest thing to a comms specialist they had left. Their actual comms sergeant, Petrov, had caught a fragment burst in the initial firebase assault and was currently unconscious with a pressure bandage wrapped around his head. Chen worked without shaking. That was the thing Keller would remember later. The man's hands were absolutely steady. "Done," Chen said. He handed the handset back to Keller. The frequency display read a string of numbers that didn't match any channel in the authorized communications plan. Numbers that existed in a sealed section of the electromagnetic spectrum, classified after an incident that Keller had never been briefed on and couldn't access through normal channels. The storm screamed overhead. Somewhere in the darkness, enemy forces were 40 meters away and closing. Keller pressed the transmit button. "Echo 7. He kept his voice low and flat. Tactical. No desperation in it, even though desperation was the only honest word for what he felt. "Echo 7. This is Kestrel Actual on emergency net. If anyone is listening on this frequency, we need help. 18 personnel, 4 urgent casualties. Grid reference, November, Kilo 4732. Surrounded and low on ammunition. Requesting any available support." He released the button. Static filled the handset. The deep white hiss of an empty channel, the sound of radio waves finding nothing to carry. Torres was watching him. Diaz was watching him. Every soldier in the trench who wasn't unconscious or delirious with blood loss had their eyes on the handset in his grip. 10 seconds. 20. A mortar round hit 15 meters away. The shockwave knocked snow from the trench walls in a curtain of white. Hendricks groaned. Someone else swore quietly, a single specific word delivered with the exhausted precision of someone who has run entirely out of prayers. 30 seconds. Keller looked at Torres. She looked back at him with an expression that said she'd known this was a long shot but hadn't wanted to say so. He pressed transmit again. Echo 7, this is Kestrel Actual. We are. And then the static changed, not disappeared. Changed. A subtle shift in the character of the noise, a compression in the frequency, the way radio sounds when a carrier wave is present but the voice hasn't started yet. It was a sound Keller had heard 10,000 times over 16 years of military service, the specific acoustic fingerprint of someone with their thumb on a transmit button before they speak. Every person in the trench heard it simultaneously. Every person in the trench went perfectly still. The voice that came through was female, low, unhurried in a way that was almost wrong for the situation, like someone answering a phone call from someone they expected, at a time they expected it. Echo 7, listening. Who needs me? 4 words that somehow contained multitudes. Not the crisp, protocol-correct response of a military operator. Not the panicked inflection of someone surprised to receive a transmission on a dead frequency in the middle of a winter firefight. Just 4 words, calm as stone, waiting. Keller's soldiers stared at the handset. He keyed transmit. This is Captain Adrian Keller, 43rd Recon Battalion, Kestrel Firebase. We have 18 personnel trapped in a communications trench at the coordinates I transmitted. 4 urgent casualties. Enemy force of approximately 40 personnel with armored support advancing on our position. We are critically low on ammunition and unable to extract. A pause. I don't know who you are or how you're on this frequency, but we need help. Silence for 3 seconds. Then, copy all, Kestrel Actual. A pause. I have eyes on your position. Another pause, shorter. I can help you, but I have conditions. Conditions, Torres said very quietly. Keller raised one finger. Wait. Into the handset. State your conditions. The response came without hesitation, as if the words had been prepared for a long time, rehearsed against the possibility of exactly this moment. First condition. You do not ask my location. You do not attempt to track this transmission. You do not send anyone to find me before, during, or after. Keller waited. Second condition. You follow my instructions without questioning them. If I tell you to move, you move. If I tell you to stop, you stop. If I tell you a route is dangerous, you trust me. Another pause. Third condition. When this is over, you forget the frequency. You forget this conversation. You never transmit on this band again. The static held the shape of the silence after those words. Keller looked at Torres. She made a small gesture, your call, with the exactness of someone who understood that this was not her decision and was relieved it wasn't. He looked at his soldiers, Diaz with his arm still braced under Hendricks' tourniquet, Chen clutching the radio housing, the faces along the trench wall, pale in the darkness and the snow, watching him with the specific expression of people who have run through all available options and arrived at the end of the list. A mortar round landed 12 meters away. Accepted, Keller said into the handset. All 3 conditions. You have my word. Static. Then, get your people ready to move. You'll hear me working in approximately 12 minutes. What does working mean? It means when you hear the first shot, you start moving north-northeast, bearing 045. Don't stop for anything. North-northeast puts us through the enemy line. I know where the enemy line is, Captain. Keller stared at the handset for a moment. Copy, he said finally. 12 minutes. The channel clicked off. Just static again. The anonymous white noise of a dead frequency, as if the voice had never been there at all. Torres was already moving. She had Ramirez and Ochoa pulling the 2 immobile casualties onto improvised litters. Rifle slings knotted between stocks and barrels, The oldest field expedient in the infantry handbook. She was doing it without being told, which was why Keller trusted her more than almost anyone he'd served with. "You believe her?" Diaz said quietly, close to Keller's ear. Keller didn't answer immediately. He was watching the darkness to the northeast, the precise bearing Echo 7 had given him, looking for what was there. Enemy positions, snow-covered ground, the shape of the terrain in the darkness. "We have 12 minutes to not get killed by mortars," he said finally. "What I believe doesn't matter that much right now." "Fair point. Get Hendricks ready to move." 8 minutes passed. They felt like hours. They felt like something measured in heartbeats rather than seconds, each one a separate decision made and survived. Keller moved through the trench, checking each soldier's shot. Bandages, ammunition count, mobility assessment, a quiet word for the ones who needed it, and silence for the ones who needed that instead. Private First Class Yamamoto had a wound in his left leg that had been dressed and redressed twice in the last hour. He would be slow. He would be a liability in any situation that required running, and every situation in the next 12 minutes would require running. "Can you move?" Keller asked him. "Sir?" Yamamoto's voice was tight with pain, but not fractured by it. "Where are we going?" "North-northeast." "Through the line?" "Through the line." Yamamoto looked at his leg, looked at Keller. "Yeah," he said. "I can move." Torres appeared at Keller's shoulder. "Litters are ready, 2 on each. I've got Ochoa and Reyes on one, Kowalski—" She caught herself. "Reyes and Martinez on the other." Keller noted the hesitation, the name she'd started to say, and pulled back. Not the time to ask about it. "Bearing 045, he said. "First shot, we move. Keep it tight, 5-meter spacing, weapons out. We do not stop for contact. We do not return fire unless we have absolutely no choice. The objective is the tree line at the far side of that bearing." He paused. "Any questions?" No one spoke. Good. In his experience, no questions meant one of two things. Either his soldiers understood the plan perfectly, or they'd moved beyond the phase of questions into something older and quieter. The phase where you just do the thing because it's the thing to be done. 4 minutes, Chen said, watching his watch. Keller positioned himself at the forward edge of the trench. He could see enemy muzzle flashes now, closer than before, strobing orange through the whiteout like something from a nightmare. The advancing force had spread to cover 3 approach vectors, which was correct tactical doctrine, which meant they were dealing with someone who understood their business. 40 trained soldiers. Armored support somewhere behind them. Mortar team with ranging data that was disturbingly accurate for a blizzard, versus 18 exhausted troops, 4 of them on litters, moving through the enemy line in the dark. He pushed the math out of his head. The math didn't help. 2 minutes. 1 minute. The radio crackled faintly. The carrier wave again, the pre-speech compression. No words, just presence. And then, the shot. It came from somewhere impossibly far away, from a direction that made no tactical sense, from a position that should have been inaccessible given the terrain and the storm. A single crack that cut through the wind with the particular acoustic sharpness of high-powered precision fire. Not the flat, distributed sound of a rifle, but the specific report of a cartridge designed to reach out across distances that most soldiers would describe as impossible. An enemy soldier at the far northwestern edge of the advancing line dropped straight down. No stumble, no spin, just down. The echo of the shot was still moving through the valley when the second shot came. Another enemy soldier. Eastern sector this time, a team leader based on his position and movement pattern. Down. Then a third. And then something extraordinary happened. A tracer round arced across the darkness, burning phosphorus white against the black sky. And it didn't come from the enemy position. It came from the northeast, from the direction Echo 7 had told them to move. And it traced a long, glowing line through the storm that touched the earth 200 meters ahead of the trench and burned briefly in the snow, a phosphorus marker pointing like a finger. Here. This way. Follow this. Move, Keller said. They moved. Later, Keller would not be able to reconstruct the next 6 minutes with any reliability. Memory under extreme stress does not record events in sequence. It records impressions, sensations, fragments of sound and image without temporal order. What he could reconstruct afterward was a series of disconnected images. Torres's back in front of him, her silhouette in the snow, moving fast and low. The weight of Yamamoto's arm across his shoulders, half carrying him across the frozen ground. The burning tracer line ahead of them, the only fixed point in the world. The shots continued. Regular, spaced, each one placed with a specificity that Keller, himself a qualified marksman with more trigger time than he could count, recognized as something beyond normal training. The precision wasn't just technical, it was architectural. The unseen shooter was not simply eliminating targets. She was reshaping the battlefield, collapsing the enemy's command structure by removing specific nodes, creating gaps in the line exactly where Keller's unit needed to pass. He heard an enemy commander's radio chatter. Indistinct, agitated, the specific cadence of an officer who is receiving reports that don't make tactical sense and is trying to reconcile them. They couldn't find her. They were firing into the storm, multiple directions, no coherent target acquisition. Muzzle flashes erupted across the advancing line in brief disorganized bursts, the involuntary weapons discharge of soldiers who know they're being killed from a direction they cannot determine. The gap opened up 30 meters ahead of Keller's position. "Litters first," Torres hissed. Ochoa and Reyes went through carrying the first litter at a dead sprint, bent low, knees churning through knee-deep snow. Reyes and Martinez followed with the second. The carrying was brutal work in the cold and the terrain, and Keller watched both pairs move through the gap with the focused attention of someone watching a needle thread itself through a hole that's closing. They made it. Then the rest. Chen with his radio housing, Diaz with Hendricks leaning against him, Yamamoto moving on his own with his jaw locked around whatever pain was climbing up his leg. One by one through the gap, through the brief, terrible exposed space between the enemy's broken flanks, into the darkness on the other side. A mortar round hit behind them, 30 meters back, directly on the trench they'd just abandoned. The concussive wave rolled over Keller from behind, a giant's hand pressed flat against his back, staggering him 2 steps forward. He didn't fall. He ran. The tree line was ahead, black shapes of spruce trees against a marginally lighter sky, 50 meters, 40, 30. He was through. He stopped against a tree trunk, gasping in air that tasted of pine sap and cold, and the faint chemical odor of propellant. Around him, his soldiers were doing the same thing. Stopping, breathing, the shaking hands that come when adrenaline begins its recession and the body realizes it might survive. The radio crackled. "You're alive because they're looking for me," the voice said. Quiet. Almost amused in a way that was not quite amusement, something more complicated than that. "Keep moving north through the trees. There's a frozen creek bed 200 meters ahead. Use it as a covered route. It'll take you northeast toward the valley floor." "Copy." Keller's breath was visible in the air, white clouds in the darkness. "Who are you?" A pause. "You agreed not to ask questions." "I didn't ask where you are. I asked who you are." A longer pause this time, then, "Someone who knows what this feels like." The channel clicked. Keller stared at the handset for a moment, then at Torres, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "North through the trees," he said. She nodded. They moved. The frozen creek bed was exactly where Echo 7 said it would be. This was the detail that lodged in Keller's mind as they descended into the shallow ravine, moving in a single-file tactical column with flank security out as far as the density of trees allowed. Not the shooting, extraordinary as the shooting had been. Not the tracer round guidance, which had been tactically brilliant. What stuck in his mind was the terrain knowledge. Specific, granular familiarity with a patch of frozen wilderness that a random isolated shooter shouldn't possess. Whoever she was, she knew this valley. She'd been here before. Many times, possibly. Long enough to know the creek bed, the tree lines, the angles of approach, and the covered routes, and the positions from which the enemy's command structure could be systematically dismantled. He filed it. Not the time. The column moved along the creek bed for 15 minutes without contact. The mortar fire had ceased. Through the trees, Keller could hear the enemy force reorganizing, shouted commands in a language he partially understood, vehicles repositioning, the sounds of an operation that had encountered unexpected friction and was reassessing. Reassessing. Not pursuing. Not yet. "She's still working," Diaz said from behind him. Keller listened. He could hear it now. Distant shots, spaced irregularly, from multiple directions. Not random, the same architectural precision, but applied to the pursuit force, keeping it reactive, keeping its attention fractured. She was moving between positions, he realized. Not stationary. Every time she fired, she moved before the echo died. Using the storm and the terrain as cover, staying ahead of the counter-tracking that the enemy would inevitably try to run against her. "She's holding them," Torres said quietly, "while we run." "Yes." "How long can one shooter do that against 40? Keller didn't answer. They reached the base of the valley 40 minutes after exiting the trench. The terrain opened up here. Flatter ground, visibility improving marginally as the topography blocked the worst of the wind. 200 meters across open ground, Keller could make out the shape of a structure. A collapsed farmhouse, stone walls still standing to shoulder height. The kind of ruin that proliferates in contested mountain territory. He keyed the radio. "Echo 7, we're at the valley floor. Grid reference November Kilo 4911, requesting guidance on extraction options." The response was slower this time. 12 seconds before the carrier wave clicked in, which was 12 seconds longer than before. "I need you to listen carefully, Captain." The tone had shifted. Something in the flatness of it had acquired an edge. Not urgency exactly, more like significance. "Listening. Do not go to Rally Point Zulu." Keller frowned. He hadn't mentioned Rally Point Zulu. He hadn't mentioned any rally point. "Say again?" "Rally Point Zulu. The extraction point that command will order you to use. Do not go there." A pause. "That landing zone is a kill box." The words landed in the silence of the valley with the weight of something that had been calculated and prepared before being spoken. Not an emotional statement, not a guess or a fear. A tactical assessment delivered with the confidence of someone who had evidence they hadn't shared. Keller stood very still. "How do you know about Rally Point Zulu?" Static held the silence. "Because the ambush that destroyed your firebase wasn't random. Your position was leaked, Captain. Someone inside your command network fed your coordinates to the enemy." The creek murmured under its ice. Wind moved through the spruce trees above. Somewhere far away a shot echoed. Echo 7, still working, still buying them time. "That's a serious accusation," Keller said carefully. "Yes," she said, "it is." "What's your evidence?" "The mortar targeting was too precise for a blizzard engagement. Your firebase was hit within 3 minutes of the storm reaching peak intensity when your air support was grounded and your comms were degraded. That's not luck, that's timing. And the ambush pattern..." A pause, as if she was consulting something. "The ambush pattern mirrors a classified patrol schedule that should only exist in 3 places: your firebase records, Battalion S2, and the operational planning cell at command." Silence. "The enemy knew not just where you were. They knew when you'd be most vulnerable. That information didn't come from a scout drone." Keller turned to look at Torres. Torres's face had gone very still in the way that meant she was processing something she didn't want to accept. "She's saying someone sold us," Torres said quietly. "She's saying someone sold us," Keller confirmed, "and that Rally Point Zulu is where they're waiting for the survivors." "That is what she's saying." Torres looked out across the valley, toward the ruins of the farmhouse, toward the dark shapes of the mountains beyond. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe her?" The question was simple. Keller turned it over. He thought about the mortar ranging, how fast it had found them, how accurate it had been in conditions that should have made precision targeting nearly impossible. He thought about the 40 enemy soldiers who had known their exact defensive setup. He thought about the timing, the storm, the firebase, the simultaneous collapse of their communications. He thought about Echo 7 calling her transmission a kill box without hesitation, the specificity of it, the confidence. He keyed the radio. "Echo 7. If Rally Point Zulu is compromised, where do we go? A pause. Then, I'll guide you to a secondary landing zone, off the command network. Extraction assets will need to be contacted directly, not through the battalion net. That bypasses command authority. Yes, if I do that, I'm potentially burning my career and possibly facing court-martial charges. Yes, a beat. But you'll be alive to face them. Keller stood in the valley with the frozen creek at his feet and 18 soldiers behind him, and a voice on a dead frequency ahead of him, asking him to make a decision on intelligence he couldn't verify, from a source he couldn't identify, against an authority structure that might be actively trying to kill his people. He thought about the 2 soldiers on litters. He thought about Yamamoto's leg. He thought about the look on Torres's face when she'd said she's saying someone sold us. He thought about the mortar round that had landed directly on the trench they'd just evacuated, landing exactly where they'd been. "Give me your secondary LZ coordinates," he said. "Copy," Echo 7 said. And somewhere in the dark mountains above them, the distant sound of rifle fire continued. A lone shooter holding the perimeter of their survival against 40 soldiers, alone, in a blizzard, on a frequency that was supposed to be dead. Buying them time. Still working. The coordinates. Echo 7 provided placed the secondary landing zone in a box canyon 7 kilometers northeast, accessible only through a narrow mountain pass that would be brutal terrain for a unit carrying wounded. 7 kilometers in a blizzard, with litter carriers, in sub-zero temperatures, without resupply. "That's a 4-hour movement in these conditions," Torres said, studying the terrain map she'd unfolded against the creek bank. "Maybe 5 with the litters." "I know. Hendricks needs surgery, not in 4 hours. Now. He's got maybe 2 hours of stable before—" "I know, Torres." She folded the map. Her jaw was tight. "What do we tell the soldiers?" Keller considered this for a moment. "The truth," he said. She looked at him. "The complete truth?" she said. "Including the part where someone in command may have sold our position?" "No, not that part." He met her gaze. "We tell them that we have reason to believe the primary extraction point is compromised and we're using an alternate route. We tell them it's going to be hard. We tell them we're going to make it. And if we don't make it, then it won't matter what we told them." Torres was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, for a man who just staked 18 lives on a ghost story, you're remarkably calm." "I'm not calm," Keller said. "I'm committed. There's a difference." He keyed the radio one more time. "Echo 7, we're beginning movement to the secondary LZ. We have wounded who need extraction within 2 hours." A pause. "Can you maintain cover for us while we move?" The response came after a moment, and in the silence before it arrived, Keller became aware that the distant rifle fire had stopped. Not gradually, simply stopped, all at once, as if a switch had been thrown. The absence of it was loud. "I can maintain cover," Echo 7 said. "But, Captain—" A pause. "The enemy commander has identified my general operating area. They've split forces. Half of them are still looking for you. The other half—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "They're coming for you," Keller said. "That's what I've been counting on," she said. And before he could respond to that, before he could process what she meant, what she was preparing for, what it cost her to say it with that particular calm, she spoke again. "One more thing, Captain." "Go ahead." "When command contacts you, and they will, they're going to order you to Rally Point Zulu. They're going to tell you it's secure. They're going to make it sound like the only option. And they're going to know you spoke to someone on this frequency. They're going to ask you about Echo 7. What do I tell them?" The static held the silence for a long moment. "Tell them Echo 7 doesn't exist," she said quietly. "Tell them you've been alone out here the whole time." The channel clicked off. Keller looked at the handset. He looked at Torres. He looked at the 17 soldiers behind them, battered and cold and carrying their wounded through a frozen wilderness, trying to stay alive past the next 2 hours, trying to trust a voice from a dead frequency and a bearing through enemy territory and a secondary landing zone that existed nowhere in the command plan. He thought about Echo 7's last words. "I've been counting on it. Not resignation, not despair. Strategy. She was using the hunt as cover, drawing the enemy's attention onto herself, splitting their forces, keeping the pressure off his unit's movement to the secondary LZ. 20 enemy soldiers chasing one shooter through a blizzard was 20 enemy soldiers not converging on a box canyon 7 kilometers northeast. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she'd known it from the moment she answered the radio. "Form up," Keller said. "We move in 2 minutes." He looked up at the mountains, at the dark ridgelines and the blizzard-obscured slopes where Echo 7 was moving, alone, between positions, drawing fire. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what had put her in these mountains, operating on a dead frequency, with the kind of terrain knowledge and tactical proficiency that his unit's survival now depended on entirely. Didn't know what the sealed incident was, the classified disaster that had buried the frequency 6 years ago, or what part she'd played in it. All he knew was that she was out there, working. For them. For soldiers she'd never met, on behalf of a military that apparently wanted her erased. "Keep pushing," he said to Torres. They started moving. 43 minutes into the movement, the battalion radio came alive. Not the sealed frequency, the primary net, the authorized channel that had been dead since the firebase fell. It came back as they were crossing a ridge saddle, crackling with the particular quality of a signal that had been trying to reach them for a long time and had finally found a gap in the terrain interference. "Kestrel Actual, this is Paladin 6. Do you read?" Keller stopped. Around him the column halted, soldiers dropping to their knees in the snow, the litter teams grateful for even 30 seconds off movement. He looked at the handset for a moment. Paladin 6, the battalion operations officer, Major Carver, a man Keller had known for 8 years. A careful, precise officer, attentive to protocol. An officer who had access to the operational planning cell, who knew about Rally Point Zulu, who would have been one of 3 people with access to the patrol schedule that Echo 7 had described. Keller looked at Torres. Torres very carefully did not look back at him. He keyed the primary net handset. "Paladin 6, Kestrel Actual. We read you, loud and clear." Kestrel Actual, thank God. The relief in Carver's voice sounded genuine. It sounded completely genuine. "What's your status? We lost comms hours ago. We've been trying to..." Firebase Kestrel is destroyed. 18 survivors, 4 urgent casualties. We're currently mobile, moving toward a pause. Moving toward a safe location. "What's your current grid?" Keller looked at the map. He looked at the ridge saddle they were standing on, at the terrain between here and the secondary LZ, at the 7 kilometers of frozen wilderness that stood between his wounded soldiers and a helicopter that might or might not exist. He gave Carver a grid reference, a false one, 3 kilometers south of their actual position. A valley floor with no tactical value, no cover, no approach. "Copy grid," Carver said. "Kestrel Actual, we're dispatching extraction assets to Rally Point Zulu immediately. You need to make for Rally Point Zulu. Bearing 275 from your position, approximately." "We can't make Rally Point Zulu," Keller said. "Too much enemy contact between us and that position." A pause on the other end. "Short, calculating. Kestrel Actual. We have intelligence that enemy forces in your area have been neutralized. Rally Point Zulu is secure. This is a direct order. Negative, Paladin 6. Keller kept his voice level. "We have on-the-ground intelligence that contradicts that assessment. We're proceeding to an alternate extraction point. I'll provide coordinates once we're established and secure." A longer pause. When Carver's voice came back, it had changed. The relief was still there, but underneath it, something else. A precision. A specificity that felt less like concern and more like calculation. "Captain Keller, I need you to listen to me carefully. Proceeding to an unauthorized extraction point is a court-martial offense. You need to follow this order." "Understood, sir." Keller looked at Torres. "We'll discuss it when we're out." He turned off the primary net. He stood on the ridge saddle in the blizzard with his soldiers looking at him, and he thought about Major Carver's voice. He thought about Echo 7's voice. He made his choice. "Keep moving," he said. They reached the box canyon at 0300 hours. The last kilometer had been the worst. A steep descent through broken terrain in total darkness. The litter carriers working in shifts because no one could sustain it continuously. the wind channeled by the canyon walls into something close to a physical assault. Yamamoto had kept up on his own, which was a kind of miracle, or maybe just a kind of stubbornness that refused to be categorized as either. The canyon floor was flat and wide enough to land a medium helicopter. Keller called it out. 150 meters clear, hard-packed snow, no major obstacles. He'd landed in worse. He keyed the sealed frequency. Echo 7, we're at the secondary LZ. Grid November, Kilo 5147, requesting confirmation of extraction assets. Static. A long silence that was different from before. Not the waiting silence, the pre-speech compression. Just static. Keller felt the first cold thread of real dread moving through him since the firebase. Echo 7. Nothing. Echo 7, come in. Torres was beside him, looking at the handset. Then the carrier wave appeared. Faint. Further away than before, as if the transmitting radio were a long distance from its previous position. The voice, when it came, was the same flat calm, the same unhurried delivery. But something in the background had changed. Wind. Not the distant howl of the blizzard, but the close, immediate blast of wind hitting a radio held in the open, in an exposed position. Kestrel actual. Echo 7. We're at the LZ. We're here. Good. A pause. I've arranged for a civilian contractor helicopter. Call sign Raven 4. They're on approach from the south. ETA approximately 16 minutes. They're expecting your grid. Copy. A pause. Echo 7, what's your situation? Silence. My situation is fine, Captain. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm giving you. You said they split forces. Half were coming for you. Half of 40 is 20. I've handled worse. The wind in the background of the transmission was very loud. Come to the LZ, Keller said. We have 16 minutes. You can make this position in 16. I can't. The two words landed simply. No drama in them, no self-pity, just fact. Why? Another pause. In the background, the wind howled. Because they're between me and you. Then, and because this is how it works, Captain. Keller stood in the box canyon with his wounded soldiers around him and the night above him and 16 minutes on the clock, and he didn't say anything for a moment. I'm not leaving you here, he said finally. The response came back quiet and absolute. You don't have a choice. You have 4 people who'll die if that helicopter doesn't get them to a surgeon. You have 14 other people who've been through a bad enough night. Echo 7, get your people home. At least tell me your name. The static held the silence for a long time. The wind howled, and then, before she answered, before the voice came back through the dead frequency with the name that Keller would carry for the rest of his career, like a splinter he couldn't reach, before any of that, a sound arrived from somewhere in the mountains above the canyon. Not a shot. Something else. The sound of a military vehicle. Multiple vehicles. Engines in low gear picking their way through mountain terrain, moving without lights, moving toward the canyon. Torres grabbed his arm. They didn't need to track us, she said, her voice very low and very controlled. They knew where we were going. The primary net handset crackled in Keller's vest pocket, the one he'd turned off. He hadn't turned it off. He'd thought he had. He'd reached for the dial in the darkness on the ridge saddle, and he'd turned something, but in the cold and the dark and the chaos, the handset crackled again, and he understood. They'd been listening the whole time. The grid he'd given Carver, the false one, hadn't mattered, because the radio itself had been transmitting his position through the movement. Every meter of the 7-kilometer march through the mountains, every turn, every pause, right to the secondary LZ coordinates that Echo 7 had given him, right to the box canyon. The engines were closer now. He could see lights. Not headlights, the vehicles were running dark, but the faint blue-white glow of instrument clusters visible through gaps in the canyon walls. His soldiers were looking at him. Hendricks was delirious on his litter. Yamamoto had his weapon up, pointing at the canyon entrance. Torres was already moving the litters toward the south wall, toward the deepest shadow, buying them seconds. Raven 4 was 14 minutes out, and the forces that had just found them, that had tracked them through 7 kilometers of blizzard and deception were going to be inside the canyon in approximately 4. Keller keyed the sealed frequency one last time. Echo 7. Static. Echo 7, they found us. They tracked the primary radio. We're at the secondary LZ with approximately 4 minutes before contact. His voice was steady. He made it steady. If you're still out there, we need you one more time. The static held. The engines were very close now, and the radio said nothing. The static held for 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. Then the canyon entrance exploded with light. Not the vehicles, something else. A single brilliant flash from the ridgeline above the southern wall, a muzzle signature so brief it was almost imaginary, and the lead vehicle lurched hard to the left and stopped. The engine sound changed from a purposeful growl to a high mechanical whine, then silence. The driver's side window had ceased to exist. No one in the canyon moved. Then the second shot came, and the second vehicle's front axle dropped into the snow as both front tires deflated simultaneously. A precision double tap that Keller had never seen executed outside of a controlled range environment, let alone in a blizzard at night from an elevated position against moving targets. The vehicles behind the disabled lead truck had no room to maneuver. The canyon entrance was narrow enough that 2 disabled vehicles created a complete choke point. The tactical consequence of that was immediate and absolute. The pursuing force was stopped, not destroyed. Stopped. Buying time. That was all it could be. Buying time with the same cold economy that had characterized every decision Echo 7 had made in the last 2 hours. She's still working, Diaz said from somewhere behind Keller, his voice carrying something that wasn't quite awe, but was in the same family. Keller was already moving. South wall? Everyone against the south wall. Weapons up, watch the canyon rim. They'll try to flank through the high ground. He turned to Torres. Get the litter centered, lowest point of the canyon floor. If they get shooters on the rim... Already moving. Torres had Ochoa and the others repositioning before he finished the sentence. The radio remained silent on the sealed frequency. No carrier wave, no pre-speech compression. Just the white noise of an empty channel and the distant sound of shouting from beyond the disabled vehicles. Commanders trying to reorganize a force that had just had its advance element stopped by a shooter they couldn't locate. 13 minutes to Raven 4. Maybe 12 now. A burst of automatic fire raked the canyon wall 8 feet above Keller's head. Not aimed, suppressive, probing, testing the darkness. The round struck rock and threw sparks and whined off into the night, and the echo of them rolled around the canyon walls 3 times before it died. Contact high. 11 o'clock, Chen called. A figure on the western canyon rim. Then 2 more. They'd sent scouts up the outside and were moving along the ridgeline, trying to get a firing position down into the floor. Yamamoto, Reyes, Western Rim, engage. Both soldiers opened up in short controlled bursts, and the figures on the rim scattered back from the edge. One of them fell, caught the rim itself, hung for a moment, then pulled back out of sight. Not dead, just dissuaded. For now. The radio crackled. Not the sealed frequency. The primary net, the one Keller had realized, was transmitting his position, the one he'd turned off, or thought he'd turned off. He ripped it from his vest, thumbed the battery release, caught the battery pack before it hit the snow. Too late for that to matter. They were already here. But he wasn't going to keep broadcasting. He counted 12 enemy personnel visible from his position, the dismounted troops working around the disabled vehicles, moving with the deliberate spread of soldiers preparing a coordinated assault, using the vehicles for cover while their flanking elements tried to establish the high ground. The high ground was the problem. Once they had shooters on both canyon rims, the floor became indefensible regardless of ammunition or positioning. They had maybe 8 minutes before that happened. Raven 4 was 11 minutes out. The math was simple, and it was terrible. Torres. He moved to her position at the southern wall, crouching beside her in the shadow. Talk to me about options. Options? She said, with the tone of someone who has been asked to describe a menu at a restaurant that is on fire. Real ones. She was quiet for 4 seconds, scanning the terrain. Northern end of the canyon, there's a boulder field about 60 meters out. Natural cover, broken ground. If we can get the litters there, they have some protection from the rim, even if the enemy gets shooters up high. She paused. But moving the litter 60 meters with enemy dismounts working around the choke point means we're exposed for approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds. At minimum. Keller looked at the canyon floor. 60 meters of open ground. 4 soldiers on litters who couldn't move themselves. 14 others who were running on fumes and cold, and the specific operating reserve that soldiers access when everything else is gone. What's covering the move? Nothing, Torres said, unless... The sealed frequency crackled. Both of them turned. The carrier wave came in faint but clear, and the voice behind it was the same voice, same flat calm, same unhurried delivery. But the background was different now. Closer wind, the kind of closeness you get when you're moving, when the transmitting antenna is being carried through open terrain rather than held steady at a firing position. She was moving. Echo 7, Keller said immediately. I'm repositioning, the voice said. Not a response to his address, more like a status update, information delivered because it was tactically relevant. I can cover your movement to the northern boulder field, but I need 3 minutes to reach an angle. We don't have 3 minutes. 2 then. 2 is... He stopped. He looked at the rim. The enemy scouts had pulled back, but they'd be trying again, and the next attempt would be better coordinated. 2 might work. Maybe. It'll have to. A brief pause. Get your people ready to move on my signal. When I fire, you move immediately. Don't wait. Don't look for me. Don't slow down for anything. What's your signal? You'll know. The channel clicked. Torres was already relaying the movement order in the quiet, precise shorthand she and the soldiers had developed over months of working together. Hand signals augmented by whispered words, the information passing down the line with the speed of something rehearsed, which none of this had been, and yet somehow resembled. Keller checked his rifle. 22 rounds remaining. He counted the enemy personnel he could see from his position. 7 visible near the vehicles, 2 confirmed on the western rim, at least 2 more on the eastern rim attempting the same flanking route. That was 11. There were more. The force that had tracked them through the mountains was not 11 people. The litter teams were ready. Ochoa and Martinez on Hendricks, Reyes and a soldier named Park on the second litter. Both pairs had their heads down, watching Keller, waiting. Yamamoto had repositioned himself to the edge of the south wall, where he could cover the western rim approach. His leg was bad enough that Keller could see the way he was distributing his weight, the slight lean that meant he was taking as much load as possible off his left side. He was still shooting accurately. That was the kind of man Yamamoto was, apparently. The kind who shot accurately while his leg tried to ruin him. 1 minute passed. The enemy on the rim was visible again. More of them this time. 3 confirmed on the western edge, trying to establish a prone position with a clear angle down to the canyon floor. When they got settled, when they got their sights aligned, the floor would become a shooting gallery. Keller raised his rifle. Yamamoto. I see them. Both of them opened up simultaneously, short bursts, forcing the rim figures to break position and scramble back. It worked. It would keep working for maybe 30 more seconds before the enemy adapted their approach and started using proper bounding overwatch to establish the position in a way that couldn't be disrupted by direct fire from below. Then, the signal. It was exactly what Echo 7 had said. Unmistakable. A single shot from the southern ridgeline, above and behind the canyon's south wall, a position that Keller's tactical mind immediately categorized as impossible, because reaching that ridgeline from Echo 7's last known area of operation in the time available required either an intimate familiarity with the terrain that went beyond anything normal or a physical output that defied reasonable calculation. But the shot came from there, and its effect was immediate. The lead enemy scout, who had been establishing his position on the western rim, pitched backward and disappeared. Not a wound. The manner of the fall said everything. The enemy reaction was instantaneous. Every head went down. Every shooter pulled back from exposed positions, the ingrained survival instinct of trained soldiers who have just heard a shot from an angle they weren't defending. Move, Keller said. They moved. The 60 meters to the boulder field was the longest 60 meters Keller had covered since a street clearance operation 3 years ago that he still occasionally dreamed about. The litter teams went first, Keller running alongside Ochoa's pair, his rifle up and scanning even though the running degraded his accuracy to nearly nothing. Behind him, he could hear the rest of the unit following in the loose tactical spread Torres had organized, weapons out, moving fast. 2 more shots from the southern ridgeline during the movement, both aimed at the eastern rim, both effective, keeping the enemy's secondary flanking element suppressed. The shots came at the exact moments when Keller's unit was most exposed, as if the shooter on the ridge could see precisely where they were and what they needed, which she could. She had eyes on the canyon. She'd had eyes on this canyon from the beginning. They reached the boulder field. The litters went into the deepest cover, soldiers dropping to their knees behind the largest rocks, weapons oriented outward. Keller did a head count. 18. All 18. He pressed himself against a boulder that was roughly the size and shape of a large vehicle and put his back to the cold granite and breathed. 8 minutes, Chen said. 8 minutes to Raven 4. From the disabled vehicles at the canyon entrance, a new sound had developed. The metallic clatter of what sounded like a crew-served weapon being assembled. An automatic weapon, something crew-operated and mounted, which would change the tactical equation of the canyon in a fundamental way. Once they got it operational, once they brought it to bear on the boulder field. Echo 7, he said into the sealed frequency handset, his voice low and controlled. They're setting up a crew-served weapon at the canyon entrance. If that comes online, I hear it, she said. The carrier wave was still present, which meant she hadn't moved or turned off the radio. She was holding position somewhere on the southern ridge, maintaining the angle. Can you address it? A pause. I'm almost out, she said. 3 words, no drama, just a tactical status report delivered with the same flatness as everything else. Keller understood what she meant. Not almost out of position, almost out of ammunition. The resource that made her what she was, the thing that had held 40 enemy soldiers at bay through a blizzard and a 7-kilometer running fight through mountain terrain, was nearly gone. How many rounds? The pause before she answered was brief, clipped. Enough. And before he could respond, before he could ask what enough meant and whether it included a margin for herself, the single shot came from the ridge. The crew-served weapon assembly stopped. He didn't want to think about the geometry of that shot, the angle, the range, the target. A specific person among a cluster of soldiers working in the dark on a weapon that hadn't been fired yet, whose precise location within that cluster required either a thermal optic or an understanding of weapon assembly procedure detailed enough to predict where each crew member would be standing. She had one or both. He didn't know which. 6 minutes. The enemy at the vehicles had gone quiet in the specific way that a force goes quiet when it has just sustained repeated losses from an unlocatable shooter and is reassessing. Keller had seen it before, the paralysis of a unit that doesn't know where its threat is, the way training and doctrine can fail when the threat model breaks. They'd been sent to kill a trapped unit of survivors. They had found instead a situation they hadn't been briefed on. He wondered who had briefed them. He wondered if the name Carver meant anything to them, or whether the information had passed through enough intermediary hands that the source was completely invisible by the time it reached the men at the canyon entrance. Keller, Torres's voice, quiet, from 2 boulders to his left. I'm picking up rotors. He listened. Yes. Distant south-southeast, the particular base frequency of a heavy helicopter working hard through mountain air. Raven 4. Chen, get the infrared strobe out. Orient it straight up. Pulse setting. Already on it. 5 minutes? Maybe 4. The helicopter was making better time than estimated. The sealed frequency came alive again. Not a voice, but the carrier wave, the pre-speech compression that meant she was transmitting but hadn't spoken yet. It held for 3 seconds. 4. Then, Captain. Something in the delivery made him turn the handset in his grip without knowing why. Something in the specific quality of her voice. Still flat, still controlled, but with a hairline fracture in it that hadn't been there in any of the previous transmissions. Go ahead, he said carefully. Raven 4 will land hot. There may be accurate fire on the LZ during the approach. The enemy has regrouped and is moving 2 elements through the boulder field's western exposure. A pause. When the helicopter touches down, your people have 60 seconds to board. Not more. Understood. Another pause. Longer. Make sure Hendricks gets on first. Keller frowned. A specific name. She'd been listening to their transmissions long enough to know Hendricks by name, which meant she'd been on frequency before he'd called Echo 7, or she'd been monitoring some form of their communications during the movement, or both. Why are you telling me that? Because he's the most critical, and in the chaos of a hot LZ extraction, the most critical often gets left for last. Her voice was absolutely level. I've seen it happen. The weight of that sentence, I've seen it happen, sat in the cold air between the transmission and his reception, and Keller felt for the first time something beyond tactical respect for the voice on the frequency. A shape beginning to form behind the flatness. A history. Echo 7, he said. After we're out. Don't. I'm going to find a way to come back for... Don't, she said again, and the second time it was quieter, which made it carry more. A burst of automatic fire from the western exposure of the boulder field, exactly where she'd said the enemy elements were moving. Rounds struck the rocks above Keller's position and threw sparks into the darkness. He pressed flat against the granite while his soldiers returned fire into the darkness. The rotors were louder now. He could see the helicopters approach. No lights, running dark, coming in low over the southern ridgeline. The pilot navigating by instruments, and the infrared strobe Chen was pulsing from the center of the boulder field. The downwash of it reached them before the aircraft was visible, the displaced Arctic air slamming down into the canyon in a column that ripped the snow from the ground in a horizontal sheet. Hendricks first, Keller said to Torres, already moving. The helicopter flared into a landing 30 meters from their position. A controlled crash more than a landing, the pilot clearly experienced with hot extractions, touching down hard and fast with the side doors already open and a crew member leaning out with a weapon oriented at the canyon entrance. Go, Keller said. Everyone go. The unit moved. It was controlled chaos, the most honest description of any hot LZ extraction. Controlled chaos maintained by training and the very specific kind of leadership that doesn't require words because everyone already knows their job. Litters went first as ordered. Hendricks and the second critical casualty hauled aboard while the helicopter crew pulled and the soldiers pushed. Then the mobile wounded, then Torres directing the remaining personnel in, counting heads as they went. Incoming fire from the western exposure. Disciplined bursts now, the enemy element having established a position during the landing distraction. Rounds walked across the ground between the boulders and the helicopter. Return fire from Yamamoto and two others, suppressing the western exposure. From the southern ridge, a shot. Then another. Then a third, rapid, measured. Not the one-shot, one-result rhythm of the previous 2 hours, but a faster cadence, the cadence of a shooter burning through remaining rounds against multiple targets. The suppressive fire from the western exposure stuttered and dropped. Keller, Torres at the helicopter door. Everyone's on. We're one short. We need you. He looked at the ridgeline. He looked at the radio in his hand. He keyed the sealed frequency. Echo 7. Everyone's aboard. Come to the LZ now. We have room. Static. Echo 7. Lena, whoever you are, come to the LZ. The helicopter's engine pitch rose, the pilot's signal for we are leaving in approximately 20 seconds regardless. Echo 7. And through the static, through the rotor wash and the gunfire, and the 20-second clock running in his chest, the voice came back, calm, unhurried. Everything it had been from the first moment she'd answered. I told you, she said. Ghosts don't get evac. Keller stood at the helicopter door with one foot on the skid and the rotors throwing a hurricane at his back, and he looked at the southern ridgeline, and for a moment, just a moment, he thought he could see her, a shape against the skyline, prone, still. A figure so still in the chaos of the canyon that it was almost easier to believe she wasn't there, that he was seeing what he wanted to see in the dark and the snow. Torres's hand closed around his arm. He got on the helicopter. The door closed. As the aircraft lifted, banking south and climbing hard through the mountain air, Keller pressed himself against the door and looked through the porthole window at the canyon below. At the boulder field, at the southern ridge line, the figure was gone, or had never been there. But the firing from the western exposure had stopped, and the enemy elements that had been assaulting the boulder field had stopped advancing, And as the helicopter climbed away from the canyon and the wind took it and the mountains fell away below, Keller could see, in the very last moment before the canyon disappeared into the storm, a single muzzle flash from the southern ridge. One shot, then nothing. He sat back from the window. Around him, his soldiers were in the various stages of post-combat collapse, the physical and emotional deflation that happens when the body finally accepts that it is not going to die in the next 30 seconds and begins the process of accounting for itself. Diaz had his eyes closed. Yamamoto was holding his leg with both hands with the expression of a man who has been refusing to acknowledge pain for so long that the refusal has become a kind of identity. Chen was staring at the ceiling of the helicopter with an expression that Keller couldn't read. Torres sat across from him. She was watching his face. "She made it," Torres said. Not a question. Keller looked at the window. The mountains were gone now, swallowed by the storm and the altitude and the distance. "I don't know," he said. Torres was quiet for a moment. "You're going to look for her." "Yes." "She asked you not to." "She did." Torres looked at her hands. "She knew the frequency. She knew the terrain. She knew our patrol schedule well enough to identify a leak in command." She paused. "And she knew Hendrix's name." "Yes." "That's not someone who's been living in the mountains for 6 years with no contact." Torres looked up. "That's someone who's been watching, systematically, for a long time." "Yes," Keller said again. "Watching what?" He didn't answer that. He was thinking about what she'd said. "I've seen it happen." And the weight behind those words, the specific weight of someone who wasn't describing a theoretical scenario but a memory. Something witnessed, something that had happened to people she knew, or people she was trying to protect, in exactly the kind of situation she'd just spent 2 hours preventing. He was thinking about the classified incident, the sealed frequency, the disaster that had buried Echo 6 years ago and erased everything associated with it from the accessible record. He was thinking about the fact that Major Carver had known about Rally Point Zulu, had known about their movements, had directed them toward a landing zone that Echo 7 had called a kill box without hesitation, and had been right. And he was thinking about what that meant, what it had been, and for how long, and how deep it went. The helicopter banked east, climbing above the storm ceiling, and for a moment the sky above the clouds was startlingly clear, black and enormous and scattered with stars that had no idea what was happening in the valleys below them. "She said the incident that closed the frequency happened 6 years ago," Keller said. Torres nodded. "A classified disaster." Her words. "Yes. That's not ancient history. That's recent enough to still be active in someone's files." Torres understood immediately. "You're saying whoever buried Echo 7 is still operational?" "I'm saying whoever sent 40 soldiers to a secondary LZ that only existed on a sealed frequency transmission is still operational." He paused. "And I'm saying Echo 7 has been watching them. That's why she knows the terrain. That's why she knows the patrol schedules. That's why she knows which landing zones are kill boxes." He looked at Torres. "She's been building a case." Torres stared at him. "For 6 years," she said. "For 6 years." The helicopter flew east through the cleared air above the storm. Below them, the mountains were invisible, buried in white. Somewhere in those mountains, on a southern ridgeline above a box canyon, a figure was either moving through the snow toward safety or was not. Keller pulled the sealed frequency handset from his vest. The battery was still live. The channel was still open. He looked at it for a long time. He pressed transmit. "Echo 7. His voice was quiet enough that only Torres could hear it over the rotor noise. "I don't know if you can receive this. I don't know if you're still out there." A pause. "But I want you to know. I'm going to find out what happened 6 years ago. The incident. All of it." He stopped. "You've been carrying this alone for a long time. I'd like that to stop." He released the button, static, the clean white hiss of an open channel with no one transmitting. He left the frequency open. Torres watched him hold the handset and say nothing, and she didn't say anything either, because there are moments in the aftermath of impossible nights when words are simply the wrong tool, and both of them understood that. The helicopter flew on. The storm churned below. And in the static of the dead frequency, in the space between Keller's last words and whatever came next, something changed. Not a voice, not a carrier wave, something smaller than that. A fractional shift in the character of the noise, so brief and so subtle that it might have been equipment interference, might have been atmospheric distortion, might have been the product of an exhausted mind searching the static for something it desperately wanted to find. Or it might have been a transmit button pressed and held for exactly 1 second by someone who wanted to say something and decided, in the end, not to say it. Keller looked at the handset. He said nothing, but he kept the frequency open for the entire flight home. Part 3. Lui, Viet Sao Ngin Den Sao Ngin Nam Cham Tu, Noi Lien Mike Voi Part 2. Không Doi Theo Lai Ko, they landed at Forward Operating Base Harlow at 04:47. The base materialized out of the pre-dawn darkness as a cluster of lights and prefabricated structures behind a perimeter wall, the kind of installation that existed everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Functional, temporary, already wearing the patina of a place that had been lived in too hard for too long. Raven 4 touched down on the medevac pad in a storm of rotor wash and red landing lights, and before the skids fully settled, the medical team was already moving. 2 trauma nurses and a surgeon Keller didn't recognize running low under the blades with a gurney, voices clipped and professional, hands already reaching for Hendricks. Keller stepped off the helicopter onto solid ground and felt his legs register the solidity with something close to surprise. 18 hours of frozen trenches and mountain terrain had apparently renegotiated his body's expectations about what solid ground was supposed to feel like. Torres landed beside him. She looked at the base, at the lights, at the cluster of personnel waiting beyond the medevac pad, medical staff, a duty officer, and 2 other figures standing slightly apart from the rest in the particular posture of people who are there for reasons other than medical support. Company, Torres said quietly. Keller had already seen them. The first figure was Colonel Margaret Ashford, the brigade commander, which was unexpected. Colonels did not typically meet helicopter extractions at 0400 unless the situation that produced the extraction had significant command implications. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with the kind of physical stillness that Keller associated with people who had learned through long practice to conserve energy for moments that actually required it. The second figure was Major Carver. Keller's soldiers were filing off the helicopter around him. Torres, Diaz, Chen, Yamamoto limping badly now that the adrenaline had fully receded. The medical team was moving Hendricks with the controlled urgency of people who understood that seconds had specific values attached to them. None of it occupied more than a fraction of Keller's attention. Most of his attention was on Carver. The major looked exactly as he always did. Pressed, precise, the kind of officer who maintained his presentation as a matter of professional identity, regardless of what time it was or what had happened. But he was standing 3 feet to Ashford's left and slightly behind her, which was correct for his rank, and he was watching Keller's face with an expression of careful neutrality that told Keller nothing and everything simultaneously. Ashford moved first. She crossed the medevac pad with efficient strides, not running, and stopped in front of Keller with the kind of personal space calibration that flagged a serious conversation. "Captain," her voice was level, not warm, not cold, transactional. "Colonel, you're going to tell me exactly what happened out there, starting with why you bypassed the authorized extraction point and ending with why your primary radio's battery was manually removed mid-operation." Keller looked at her. Behind her, Carver was watching. "I will," Keller said. "Ma'am, with respect, I'd prefer to do that in a private setting." A pause. Ashford studied him for a moment with the focused attention of someone reading fine print. "My office," she said. 20 minutes. She turned and walked back toward the base's main structure without waiting for acknowledgement. Carver followed her, and as he passed Keller, he did something that Keller registered and filed with the specificity of a man cataloging evidence. He met Keller's eyes for exactly 1 second, and in that second, his expression shifted from neutral to something that was almost a warning. Then it was gone, and Carver was walking away, and Torres was beside Keller saying very quietly, "Did he just—" "Yes," Keller said. "What does that mean?" "I'm going to find out." "Yes." 18 minutes later, Keller sat in a chair across a metal desk from Colonel Ashford and told her a version of the night that was true in every verifiable particular and incomplete in the ways that mattered. He told her about the firebase falling, about the trench, about the communications failure, and the decision to try an alternative frequency. He told her about the voice on the frequency, the tactical support, the tracer-guided movement through the enemy line. He told her about the warning regarding Rally Point Zulu and his decision to divert to the secondary LZ. He did not tell her the name of the frequency. He said an old recon band and left it there. He did not tell her what Echo 7 had said about the leak in command. He did not tell her about the specific accusation regarding the precision of the ambush, the patrol schedule, the 3 people who had access to the operational planning cell. He told her that he'd removed the primary radio battery because he'd assessed it was compromising their position. Ashford listened to all of it without interrupting. She sat with her hands folded on the desk and her eyes on his face, and she listened with the complete attention of someone storing every word with the intention of examining it later for inconsistencies. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The voice on the frequency," she said. "You have no identification." "No, ma'am." "Male, female?" "Female." Ashford wrote something on the notepad in front of her. "And this person had current intelligence on Rally Point Zulu's security status." She said it was compromised. She was correct. The force that tracked us to the secondary LZ confirms that someone knew our movement. "Someone," Ashford said. "Someone." The word sat between them. Ashford looked at it for a moment. "Captain, I want to be direct with you. What you're implying, even by omission, is a serious accusation against personnel in this command structure." "I understand that, ma'am. And I want you to understand that accusations of that nature require evidence, not a voice on an unauthorized frequency, not a tactical assessment made by an unidentified individual in the field." She paused. "Evidence." "Yes, ma'am." A pause. "Are you opening an investigation into the firebase ambush?" Something crossed Ashford's face. Brief. A compression around the eyes, a slight adjustment of the muscles around her mouth. The physical vocabulary of someone who has just been asked a question they expected but still found uncomfortable. "That determination is above my authority," she said. "Above Brigade Command's authority?" "Captain." "Ma'am." She looked at him steadily. "You need to rest. We'll continue this after you've slept and medical has cleared you." Keller stood. He picked up his cover from the corner of the desk where he'd set it. "Colonel Ashford," he said, 18 people came home tonight. 4 of them are in surgery or recovery right now. I want to make sure whoever made it necessary for them to be there is held accountable." He paused. "I'll take whatever channel you point me toward, but I'm going to find that channel." Ashford said nothing. He left. The base was quiet in the pre-dawn hour in the specific way that military installations go quiet. Not truly quiet, never truly quiet, the generators and the distant vehicle movement and the radio traffic from the duty section forming a constant low presence beneath the silence. Keller walked from the command building toward the transient barracks and took a route that passed the intelligence section, which was dark, and the communications section, which was not. Chen was in the communications section. This surprised Keller for approximately 2 seconds before it stopped surprising him. Chen had been their de facto comms specialist for the last several hours, and clearly the role had activated something in him because he was sitting at a terminal with the particular focused intensity of someone pursuing a specific piece of information, not simply occupying a workstation. Keller stood in the doorway. "You're supposed to be in medical," he said. "I went." Chen didn't look up. "They said I was fine. I signed the form." "What are you doing?" "Looking at something." A pause. "The PRC 117G frequency override, the one I ran tonight. I've been thinking about the band we accessed." He finally looked up. His face in the terminal light was younger looking than Keller was used to, stripped of the field composure layer. "Sealed frequencies don't just get sealed, sir. There's a classification action. Paperwork, an incident report, a decision chain, and that chain has names on it." Keller stepped into the communications section and let the door close behind him. "You're looking for the classification action on Echo 7. I'm looking for any reference to that frequency band in the accessible records database. Chen turned back to the terminal. And I'm finding something interesting. Which is? The band is classified, but the classification action references a parent document. He pointed at the screen. Document number 7741-alpha-kilo, dated 6 years and 2 months ago. Classified above my clearance level, but the existence of the document is accessible. He paused. The document title is After Action Report, Operation Greyhound. Keller looked at the screen. Operation Greyhound, he said. Never heard of it. Neither has the unclassified index, which is unusual for a named operation. Named operations get logged even when the content is classified. They exist in the index. Chen paused. This one doesn't exist in the index. Someone removed it. Someone removed it from the index but forgot, or didn't bother, to scrub the reference in the frequency classification action. Chen looked at Keller. Which means the operation was buried after the fact, retroactively. 6 years ago. A classified disaster. Her entire team sacrificed. An after-action report that had been removed from the record system but left a ghost in the frequency documentation. Some soldiers are never truly gone. Can you get access to 7741 Alpha Kilo? Not from here. Chen paused. But I know who can, nods. The name Chen gave him was Captain Elise Varda, the base's intelligence officer, a woman Keller had met twice at briefings and assessed as competent, careful, and possessed of the kind of institutional skepticism that made good intelligence officers and difficult dinner companions. He found her in her quarters at 0530, awake, which said something about her or about the night's events, or both. She opened the door, looked at him, looked at the state of his uniform, and said, I heard the extraction came in hot. Yes. You look like you've been outside for about 12 hours. Closer to 15. She stepped back from the door. He came in. It took him 10 minutes to tell her what he needed, which was less than the full story and more than he'd told Ashford. He told her about the frequency, about Echo 7, about the tactical intelligence that had been accurate in every verifiable detail, including the killbox assessment of Rally Point Zulu. He told her about Operation Greyhound, the buried classification action, the retroactive removal from the index. He watched her face while he talked. Varda had the intelligence officer's habit of listening without reacting, storing information without broadcasting its effect, which meant he couldn't read her during the first 8 minutes. But in the 9th minute, when he said the name Greyhound, something happened in her eyes that wasn't neutral. You know it, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I know of it, she said carefully. There are certain things in this business that you hear about sideways, not officially. The way a story gets told at the wrong hour by someone who's had too much to drink, or the way a name gets mentioned once and then never mentioned again. Greyhound. Greyhound. She sat down. She looked at her hands. 6 years ago, a recon team, 8 personnel, deployed on a long-range surveillance mission in the northern sector. Highly classified, genuinely classified, not the routine kind. The team was tracking a high-value target, had been in the field for 11 days. She paused. Command ordered a fire mission, an artillery strike on a target the surveillance team had identified. A friendly fire incident. No. Her voice was precise. That's the thing. It wasn't a navigation error or a coordinates mistake. The strike was ordered knowing the recon team was in the target area. It was ordered because the team had gathered intelligence that someone in command didn't want gathered, and eliminating the team under the cover of a fire mission was cleaner than the alternative. The room was very quiet. Cleaner than the alternative, Keller repeated. 7 of the 8 were killed in the strike or in the engagement that followed. She looked up. The 8th was listed as killed in action in the after-action report. The report was then buried and the frequency they'd been using was classified and sealed. A pause. The 8th was never found. No remains, no confirmed death, just listed. Because she wasn't dead, Keller said. Varda looked at him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, processing the she, processing the implication of the present tense, processing everything that those 2 words meant when placed next to everything he'd just told her. The voice on the frequency, she said slowly. She knew the terrain. She knew the patrol schedules. She knew which landing zones were set up as kill boxes. He paused. She's been watching for 6 years, building something. Building a case, Varda said. That's what I think. Against who? Against whoever gave the order to fire on the recon team in Greyhound. He paused. Whoever is still operational. Whoever is still running the same game, using command authority to eliminate inconvenient personnel and then burying the evidence. He paused again, longer this time. Whoever knew our patrol schedule precisely enough to time an ambush to the minute. Varda was very still. Keller, she said, and her voice had dropped to the register of someone who is choosing their words with extreme care. If what you're describing is accurate, if there's an active operation to suppress Greyhound and eliminate witnesses, then the person or people responsible have enough institutional authority to have buried a named operation 6 years ago without anyone catching it. She met his eyes. Which means they have enough institutional authority to know this conversation is happening. I know. And you're still having it. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. I need to think, she said. I know. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight. He stood. I'm asking you to know what I know. In case... He stopped. In case something happens to you, she said. In case something happens to either of us. He moved toward the door. Document 7741-Alpha-Kilo. After action report, Operation Greyhound. That's where it starts. He left. The sun came up gray and cold over FOB Harlow, the winter light arriving without warmth or ceremony, flattening everything it touched into the same muted palette of concrete and snow and dirty ice. Keller had not slept. He understood intellectually that he needed to sleep. 15 hours of sustained combat operations had a physiological debt attached to them that couldn't be indefinitely deferred. But his mind was running on something that wasn't exactly adrenaline anymore, something quieter and more persistent. He was in the MWR room, a spare prefab space with 4 chairs and a coffee machine that produced a liquid technically describable as coffee, when Torres found him at 0700. She sat down across from him. She had clearly slept, or at least rested, and had changed into clean utilities, which made her look more capable of rational thought than Keller currently felt. How's Hendricks? He asked. Out of surgery. They think he'll keep the arm. She accepted the coffee he pushed toward her. The other 3 critical are stable. Yamamoto? He's being appropriately furious about his leg, which the medical staff are interpreting as a good sign. Keller almost smiled. Almost. Torres looked at him with the specific expression she used when she was about to say something she'd been organizing for a while. You went to Varda. How do you know that? Because I know you. She paused. And because Chen told me what he found, and I knew you'd go to Varda with it. She wrapped both hands around the coffee. Is she going to help? She's thinking about it. She needs to think faster. Torres set the coffee down. Carver has been in Ashford's office for the last 2 hours. That's a long meeting for Dark 30 on a bad operational night. She paused. And there are 2 people from the Inspector General's office who arrived on the 0600 resupply flight. IG? 2 of them. Neither of them told anyone what they're here for. She looked at him steadily. They asked to speak with you first thing. Keller set down his coffee. The IG, the Inspector General's office, could mean several things. It could mean an investigation into the firebase loss, which was standard for a major friendly casualty event. It could mean an investigation into his decision to bypass Rally Point Zulu, which was a legitimate command authority question. It could mean someone in the chain wanted him contained and quiet while they managed the narrative of the night, and the IG was the fastest available tool for that. The question was which of those things it was, or whether it was all of them at once. Where are they? He said. Chen. The 2 IG representatives were in a conference room in the command building, a man and a woman, both in service uniforms without visible unit patches, both carrying the particular affect of people who had been doing institutional enforcement work long enough that it had become their natural state. The man introduced himself as Investigator Hollis. The woman was Investigator Park. They offered Keller a seat with the courtesy of people who have the authority to insist on it. He sat. Hollis opened a folder. Captain Keller, we're here to conduct a preliminary inquiry into the events of last night, specifically the loss of Firebase Kestrel and the subsequent extraction operation. He looked up. This is a preliminary inquiry, not a formal investigation. You're not under any obligation to answer our questions, but your cooperation will be noted. I understand, Keller said. Can you describe the events leading to the Firebase loss? He described them. The same account he'd given Ashford, with the same careful omissions. Hollis took notes. Park watched Keller's face with the attentive neutrality of someone trained to read it. At what point did you decide to bypass Rally Point Zulu? Hollis said. When I assessed, it was compromised. Based on what intelligence? Based on the precision of the ambush and the pattern of enemy movement. A pause. And based on information from a source in the field. What source? A voice on an alternative frequency. An individual providing tactical support to my unit. Hollis wrote something. Do you have an identification for this individual? No. A name? Keller met his eyes. No. Park spoke for the first time. Her voice was quieter than Hollis's, more precise. Captain Keller, are you familiar with an operational frequency designation known as Echo 7? The room temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. Where did you hear that designation? Keller said. Park's expression didn't change. Please answer the question. Am I being formally investigated, Investigator Park? As Agent Hollis stated, this is a preliminary because you've asked me a question about a specific operational frequency designation that, as far as I understand, is classified above my clearance level. He kept his voice level, conversational. Which means either you have clearance to discuss it, in which case I'd like to understand the context for your question, or you're attempting to confirm knowledge of something classified by watching my reaction. He paused, which is a different kind of question. Park and Hollis exchanged a look. It lasted less than a second, but it was the most informative thing either of them had done since he'd walked into the room. Not the look of investigators who have caught a subject out, the look of investigators who have just had their approach identified with more precision than they expected. Captain, Hollis said. Hollis, we're trying to understand what resources you had available during the extraction operation. I had 18 exhausted soldiers, 40 rounds per man, and 4 urgent casualties, Keller said. Those were my resources. And the voice on the frequency. A piece of luck. Static opened up for a few minutes, and someone came through. I can't explain it technically. It might have been atmospheric interference creating an open channel. Might have been a civilian emergency transmitter. I honestly couldn't tell you. He looked at Hollis steadily. What I can tell you is that the tactical guidance I received from that transmission saved 18 lives, and I'd make the same decision again. Hollis wrote. Park watched. One more question, Park said. In your assessment, was the Firebase ambush the result of an intelligence failure or something else? The question was clean and direct and designed to make him say a specific thing or pointedly not say it. Keller recognized the architecture of it. Something else, he said. Park wrote that down. Thank you, Captain. Hollis closed the folder. We may need to speak with you again. I'm available. He stood. Are you also speaking with Major Carver? Neither of them reacted visibly. Park said, We're speaking with multiple personnel. Good, Keller said. He left the conference room and walked directly to Varda's office. She was there. She was at her desk with a classified document folder open in front of her, which she closed when he entered, which meant she'd been expecting him. They know about Echo 7, he said. Varda looked at him. Who does? The IG investigators. One of them asked me directly if I was familiar with the designation. He sat, which means someone briefed them on it before they arrived. Someone who knew about the frequency. Someone who wanted to know if you'd identified the shooter. Yes. Varda was quiet for a moment. She looked at the closed folder in front of her, then at Keller. I pulled Greyhound, she said. He went still. Not the classified report. I don't have that access, but I pulled the personnel records for the recon team, cross-referencing the operation time frame with the casualty records. She opened the folder. 7 confirmed KIA. All documented, all with recovery operations logged. She paused. The 8th team member, listed as KIA but without a recovery operation, without confirmed remains. She slid a page across the desk. Keller looked at it. The name at the top of the page was Cortez, Lena M. Recon Sharpshooter, SFC. Status, KIA. Unconfirmed. Below the name, a service photograph. A woman in her early 30s in the photograph. Dark hair cut short, the particular expression of someone who has agreed to have a photograph taken but hasn't agreed to perform for it. Serious eyes. The kind of face that didn't give much away. The kind of face that could belong to a voice that was calm in a blizzard. Keller looked at the photograph for a long time. Lena Cortez, he said. She was the best shooter in her battalion at the time of Greyhound, Varda said. Her voice was careful, clinical. Qualification scores that apparently made her instructors reconsider what the upper limit of the scale should be. She had 11 months of field experience in this exact operational theater before the incident. A pause. She knew the mountains, Keller. She grew up in terrain like this. Her evaluation reports use the word instinctive about her navigation and terrain reading, which is not a word that gets written in military evaluation reports. He looked up from the photograph. Who gave the order for the Greyhound fire mission? That's in the classified AAR. She paused. But the fire mission would have required authorization from the operational planning cell, specifically from the officer commanding artillery coordination. A pause. 6 years ago in this theater, that officer was... The door opened. Not a knock, not a pause. The door simply opened, with the authority of someone who does not expect to be kept waiting and has not been. Major Carver stood in the doorway. He looked at Keller. He looked at Varda. He looked at the open folder on the desk and the photograph visible at the top of it with the particular focused attention of someone whose entire assessment of a situation changes in less than a second. Captain Keller, he said. His voice was level. Colonel Ashford would like to see you immediately. We're in the middle of something, Varda said. The colonel's request wasn't optional, Captain Varda. His eyes were still on Keller. Now, please. Keller stood slowly. He looked at Varda. She was looking at Carver with an expression that Keller couldn't read in the half-second available to read it. He looked at the photograph of Lena Cortez. He looked at Carver. Tell the colonel I'll be there in 2 minutes, he said. Now, Carver said. 2 minutes. Keller kept his voice entirely even. I'll be there in 2 minutes. The two men looked at each other across the office. The space between them was approximately 6 feet and contained a very large number of things that were not being said. Carver turned and left. The door stayed open behind him. Keller turned back to Varda. She was already moving, folding the personnel record closed, pulling a second document from under the folder, writing something on a notepad in the specific compressed shorthand of someone who has limited time and is prioritizing critical information. 6 years ago, she said quietly, writing without looking up, the officer commanding artillery coordination in this theater was a lieutenant colonel. She tore the page from the notepad and folded it once and slid it across the desk to Keller. He's been promoted since then. Keller picked up the folded page. He put it in his vest pocket without opening it. Destroy the folder, he said. Already planning to. He walked out of the office and down the corridor toward the command building, and as he walked, he could feel the folded page in his pocket with the specific weight of information that changes the shape of everything that comes after it. He did not open it until he reached the door of the command building. He stopped there in the cold corridor, back to the wall where the security camera in the corner could not see his hands, and he unfolded the page. One line. A name, and a rank. He read it. He stood very still for a moment. Then he folded the page again and put it back in his pocket and walked through the door. Because the name on that page was not Lieutenant Colonel. It was Brigadier General. And the person it named was already in the room waiting for him. Brigadier General Warren Holt stood at the window of Ashford's office with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the base in the gray morning light, and he did not turn when Keller entered. That was the first thing. The deliberate performance of not turning, the studied indifference of a man who outranked everyone in the room by enough margin that he could afford to make them wait for his attention. Keller had seen it before. The power theater of senior officers, and he had never found it impressive. He found it less impressive now than he ever had. Ashford was at her desk. Carver stood to the left of the door, which put him behind Keller when the door closed, which was a choice someone had made. The two IG investigators, Hollis and Park, occupied the chairs against the right wall with their folders closed on their laps, present as witnesses or as something else. Holt turned. He was a large man, not physically imposing in the way of someone who maintained fitness, but large in the way of someone whose institutional authority had accreted to his physical presence over decades until they were inseparable. Mid-60s, silver hair cut with military precision, the star on his collar catching the light from the window. He looked at Keller the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "Captain Keller," he said. His voice was measured, genial almost. The geniality of someone who has never needed to raise his voice because everyone in the room already understood the consequences of disagreeing with him. "Sit down." Keller sat. "I've been reading the preliminary report on last night's operation," Holt said. He didn't move from the window, didn't pick up a folder or look at notes. He was doing this from memory, which meant he'd prepared, which meant this meeting had been planned before Keller had done anything this morning, before he'd gone to Varda, before he'd opened that folded page. Firebase Kestrel. 43 personnel, significant casualties. An extraction that bypassed the authorized landing zone based on, he paused, with the performance of a man consulting his memory, the tactical judgment of a voice on an unauthorized frequency. "That's an accurate summary," Keller said. Holt finally moved. He came away from the window and sat in the chair across from Ashford's desk. Not at the desk, not behind it, but in the chair that positioned him directly facing Keller, the informal posture of a man making a deliberate choice to appear unthreatening. "I want you to understand something, Captain. What happened last night was a tragedy. The loss of Firebase Kestrel, the casualties. Those are real losses, and they deserve a thorough accounting." "I agree," Keller said. "I also want you to understand that the accounting process has to follow proper channels, proper protocol." A pause. When individual officers start conducting their own informal inquiries, accessing personnel records outside their clearance level, making allegations against senior personnel based on unverified field intelligence. He stopped. Let the incomplete sentence do its work. It creates problems, institutional problems. "I understand." Holt studied him. Something in Keller's manner, the steadiness of it, the absence of the appropriate deference, had registered. Keller could see it land. "Do you?" Holt said. "Yes, sir." A pause. "I also understand that Rally Point Zulu was a designated kill box, that an enemy force was waiting at those coordinates before we ever transmitted them on the authorized net, and that someone with access to the operational planning cell provided our patrol schedule and position to hostile forces." He kept his voice level, respectful, precise. "I understand those things very well." The room shifted. Not physically, but the temperature of it changed in the way rooms change when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when a line has been crossed that was always going to be crossed and everyone present knew it and was waiting to see who would cross it first. Ashford's hands on her desk were very still. Carver, behind Keller, made no sound. Hollis and Park did not look at each other. Holt looked at Keller. The geniality was still there. It was remarkable how well maintained it was. But something underneath it had shifted, a barely perceptible hardening, the way ice hardens when the temperature drops another degree below what it was already. "That's a significant accusation," Holt said. "It's an observation, sir, based on tactical evidence." Keller paused. "The mortar targeting on Firebase Kestrel achieved first-round accuracy in blizzard conditions at night. The ambush initiated within the first 3 minutes of peak storm interference, the precise window when our air support was grounded and our communications were most degraded. The enemy force was positioned to block every authorized extraction route simultaneously." He paused. "That level of operational precision doesn't come from field reconnaissance. It comes from inside knowledge. And you believe you know the source of that inside knowledge. I believe the investigation will identify it." Another pause. Holt leaned back slightly. "Captain, I've been in this business for 31 years. I've seen officers in your position before, men who've had a very bad night, who've lost people, who are running on no sleep and significant stress, who start looking for explanations that match the magnitude of what they've experienced. His voice was almost sympathetic. Conspiracy theories are a natural response to traumatic operational failures. The mind looks for agency because randomness is... It's not a conspiracy theory, Keller said. Holt stopped. The patrol schedule that was compromised exists in 3 locations in this command structure: the operational planning cell records, the battalion S2 files, and the brigade command system. He met Holt's eyes. Those are finite, verifiable locations. An investigation would be able to determine which access log shows unauthorized retrieval of those records in the 48 hours before the firebase assault. Silence. If the investigation is conducted properly, Keller added. Holt looked at him for a long moment. He was very good at the long moment. It was a practiced thing, the silence of a man who has spent decades letting silence work for him. Major Carver, he said finally, without looking away from Keller. Sir. Carver's voice from behind, closer than Keller expected. Would you give us the room? A pause. Then the sound of the door opening and Carver's footsteps, and the door closing again. Hollis and Park remained. Holt looked at them briefly. You too. Park looked at Hollis. Something passed between them. They stood and left, and the door closed again, and the room contracted to 3 people: Keller, Ashford at her desk, and Holt in the chair across from him. Holt put his forearms on his knees and leaned forward. The geniality dropped. Not entirely. It was too ingrained to disappear completely, but it stepped back to reveal something more direct behind it. I'm going to speak plainly to you, Holt said. Please, Keller said. You've been asking questions about an operation that was classified and closed 6 years ago. You've been accessing personnel records associated with that operation. You've been sharing what you found with your intelligence officer. He paused. That's a significant amount of activity for a man who's been on base for less than 3 hours after a major combat extraction. I work fast, Keller said. Something crossed Holt's face, fast and controlled, but Keller caught it. Operation Greyhound, Keller said, and watched the name land. It landed harder than anything else had. The geniality didn't just step back. For 2 seconds it disappeared entirely, and in the space it left was something that Keller recognized from a long career of reading people in high-stakes environments. Not guilt, exactly. Guilt was too simple for what he saw. This was the expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has become expert at carrying it, but is nonetheless tired of the weight. You don't want to go there, Holt said quietly. I think the 8 personnel of the Greyhound recon team would disagree. 7 of them are dead. 7, Keller said, not 8. The silence that followed was very complete. Ashford, who had been still at her desk throughout the entire exchange, made a small sound that wasn't a word. Keller didn't look at her. Holt sat back. The mask came back up, slower and more deliberate than before, the way a man puts on armor when he realizes the situation requires it. Whatever you think you know, Holt said, and his voice had gone cold in a way that was entirely different from the measured cold of before. This was genuine temperature, the cold of something that had stopped performing and started meaning. You don't have the documentation to support it. You have field impressions and access logs and the word of a voice on a frequency that doesn't officially exist. He paused. That's not a case. That's a story. Right now, Keller said. Holt stood. He moved back to the window, the same position he'd occupied when Keller entered, closing the loop, reclaiming the staging. He stood with his back to the room for a moment. You're a good officer, Keller. He said it to the window. Your record is excellent. Your people came home last night because of decisions you made, and I respect that. A pause. I would hate to see a career like yours derailed by an investigation that goes nowhere and costs you everything. Is that a warning? Keller said. It's an observation. About consequences. About reality. Holt turned. His face was composed again, completely composed. The 31 years of institutional authority back in place like a wall that had briefly shown a crack and been remortared. I'm going to recommend a standard after-action review for Firebase Kestrel, Full inquiry into the operational failure, complete with access log review. A pause. That review will be conducted by my office. Keller looked at him. I'll want full cooperation from all personnel involved, Holt continued, including you. A pause. Including, if she exists, whatever independent asset provided you support in the field. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Keller stood. Full cooperation, he said. Yes, sir. He turned toward the door. Captain. Ashford's voice from the desk. The first thing she'd said since he'd entered. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't been able to read earlier and still couldn't read entirely, but some of it had resolved into something clearer. Not support exactly. Not opposition, something more complicated than either. The expression of a person standing at an intersection, deciding. Get some rest, she said. The review won't start until this afternoon. He held her gaze for a moment. Yes, ma'am, he said. He left. Torres found him outside in the thin winter sunlight, sitting on the steps of the transient barracks, with the sealed frequency handset in his hands, turning it over slowly. She sat beside him without asking if he wanted company, which was one of the things about Torres. How bad? She said. Holt is running the after-action review. A pause. Holt, she said. Yes. The same Holt who... Yes. She looked at the handset in his hands. Are you going to tell me what's in that fold of paper you keep touching in your vest pocket? He looked at her. Then he took out the folded page and handed it to her. She unfolded it, read the single line, folded it back. Her face did something careful and controlled and didn't show most of what it was doing. He's running his own review, she said. Yes. That can't be legal. It's institutional, Keller said. He has the rank and the authority, and no one has yet given anyone sufficient reason to remove either. He paused. The access logs he mentioned, the ones that would show who pulled the patrol schedule, are going to be reviewed by his office, which means the results of that review are going to say whatever he needs them to say, unless someone else gets to them first. Yes. Torres was quiet. Varda, she said. She's the best option. He paused. But she's exposed now. Carver saw the folder on her desk. They know she's been pulling records. Do they know what she found? I don't know. He looked at the handset again. I need to talk to Echo 7. Torres looked at the handset. She told you to forget the frequency. I know. She was specific about it. I know that too. He turned the handset over. But she's been building a case for 6 years, and the man she built it against is currently in a position to bury everything she's gathered, and I don't think she knows that. He paused. I don't know if she's even still alive to know anything. Torres said nothing for a moment. Try, she said. He went to the communications section because it was private enough and Chen was still there, either by design or by the particular stubbornness of a man who had decided that what he was looking for was in that room. Close the door, Keller said. Chen closed it. Keller sat at the secondary terminal, away from the main monitoring systems, and reprogrammed the frequency band on the spare PRC unit sitting on the equipment shelf. The same manual override Chen had walked him through 14 hours ago in a frozen trench. The same sequence of adjustments that opened the channel that wasn't supposed to exist. He keyed transmit. Echo 7. This is Kestrel Actual. He paused. I know what you asked me. I know I agreed to it. Another pause. But things have changed. I need you to hear what I know, and I need to know you're alive to hear it. Static. The clean white hiss of an empty channel. He waited. Chen sat very still at his terminal, not looking at Keller, giving him the courtesy of pretending not to be in the room. Lena, Keller said. The name felt different spoken aloud than it had felt in his head, more specific, more real. Less like a file entry and more like a person. I know who you are. I know about Greyhound. I know about the 7, and I know you're the 8th. He kept his voice quiet and steady. I know who gave the fire mission order, and I know he's running the review. A pause. Brigadier General Warren Holt. He's here, on this base, and he's positioned to control the investigation into last night and by extension everything that connects to 6 years ago. He pressed his hand flat on the desk. If you're out there, if you're listening, I need you to know that. Static. He waited for 60 seconds, which was a long time in a quiet room with nothing but white noise. Nothing. He turned off the handset and sat still for a moment, looking at his hands. She might not have the radio anymore, Chen said quietly. I know. Or the battery could be, I know. Keller looked at the wall. Get me everything you can access on Holt's service record, specifically his assignment in this theater 6 years ago, specifically his role in artillery coordination. That's classified. Get me what's accessible and tell me what the classification wall looks like around what isn't. Chen's hands moved to his keyboard. Yes, sir. The next 3 hours were quiet, in the way that precedes rather than follows things. Keller moved through the base with the deliberate normality of a man who is doing nothing unusual, eating in the chow hall, visiting the medical section to check on Hendricks and the others, submitting the initial portions of his after-action report through the standard channels with the language scrubbed of everything that mattered. He was watched. He knew he was watched. There was a particular quality to how people in certain rooms stopped their conversations when he entered, a certain arrangement of eyes that registered his presence and continued registering it after he'd passed. He noted it and said nothing about it. At 1100, Varda appeared beside him in the corridor outside the medical section. She fell into step with him without preamble, which was how he knew she had something. Walk with me, she said. They walked. The access logs for the patrol schedule, she said, her voice low and brisk, eyes forward. The Battalion S2 system shows a retrieval of the Kestrel patrol schedule at 21:43 2 nights ago. Retrieved under a service credential that belongs to a communications specialist named Ehrlich, who was on leave at the time of the retrieval. His credential was used without him. Which means someone with admin access to the battalion personnel system pulled the schedule using a borrowed identity. She paused. The admin access log for the battalion system shows one entry in the relevant window. One person with admin rights who accessed the system between 2100 and 2200 2 nights ago. Keller kept walking. Major Carver, he said. Major Carver, she confirmed. He has system admin rights through his role as operations officer. He accessed the admin panel at 2138. The Ehrlich credential retrieval happened at 2143. A pause. 5 minutes later, they turned a corner into the covered walkway between buildings, out of the wind. That's the chain, Keller said. That's the beginning of it. She paused. Carver isn't the end. He's the mechanism, not the authority. He didn't have operational reason to pull the patrol schedule. He was acting on someone's direction. Holt. Almost certainly, but proving Holt's direction that's a different layer. She stopped walking, turned to face him. Keller, I need to tell you something. He looked at her. Her face was doing the complicated thing again, the weighing of costs expression, but it had resolved further, the way Ashford's expression had resolved that morning in a different direction. This one was resolving toward something that looked like decision. I've been in this business for 8 years, she said. I've seen things managed, quietly managed. Investigations that went nowhere, reports that got edited, personnel who got reassigned at convenient moments. She paused. I've told myself that I worked the system, that I went through channels, that the channels existed for a reason. And the channels are run by people. She looked at him steadily. I'm going to send what I have, the access logs, the credential retrieval, the chain, to the Judge Advocate General's office. Directly, not through brigade, not through Holt's command, directly to JAG at theater level. A pause. That bypasses every channel between here and there. It goes over Holt's head to a legal authority he doesn't control. Keller looked at her. That's a significant decision, he said. You told me 18 people came home because someone had been building a case for 6 years. She paused. I've been building nothing for 8 years. I'm tired of it. He held her gaze for a moment. How long does it take to reach JAG? He asked. Secure transmission, maybe 40 minutes. Response acknowledging receipt within the hour. She paused. Once JAG has the documents, any attempt by Holt to suppress the investigation creates its own paper trail. A pause. It's not bulletproof, but it changes the geometry. Do it, Keller said. She nodded. No hesitation, once the decision was made. She turned and walked back the way they'd come, and Keller watched her go and thought about the geometry of the next several hours. Holt running his review this afternoon, Varda's transmission going out this morning, the window between those two events, the question of what Holt would do if he realized the access logs had been found before he could sanitize them. He thought about Carver's face when he'd passed Keller this morning on the medevac pad, the warning that might have been a warning. He pulled out his radio and keyed the sealed frequency one more time, standing alone in the covered walkway with the wind coming through both ends. Echo 7. Varda is sending the documentation to Theater JAG within the hour. Holt's exposure is on record outside his control. He paused. Whatever you've been collecting for 6 years, if there's any way to get it to the same channel, now is the time. Another pause. I'm going to be in his review this afternoon. I can hold the line for however long it takes, but I need to know someone's out there. Static. He lowered the handset. Then the carrier wave came. Faint. Very faint, as if the transmitting radio was low on power, or very far away, or both. The pre-speech compression that he knew now, as well as he knew Torres's voice or the sound of rotors at distance. He pressed the handset to his ear. I hear you, Captain. 3 words. Quiet. Further away than before, but present. Real. Carrying the same flat calm that had been there from the beginning. He closed his eyes for half a second. Are you all right? A pause. Define all right. It was the closest thing to humor she'd produced in every hour of radio contact since the night before, and it arrived with a quality that was almost disorienting. The realization that behind the flatness, behind the tactical precision, and the ghost story, and the 6 years of mountain silence, there was a person who could still make that kind of response. Alive, he said. Define alive. Still working on it. A pause. A longer one. Holt was the one who ordered the strike. He knew we were in the target area. I have documentation. A copy of the original fire mission request with his authentication code and a transmission record showing he acknowledged our presence in the grid 30 minutes before the strike. Another pause. I've been carrying it for 6 years. Physical copies, not digital. Where? Safe. A pause. I need to know the JAG transmission will actually reach someone who can act on it before Holt realizes what's happening. Varda is good, Keller said. I trust her. You trusted me on a dead frequency in a blizzard. And 18 people came home. The static held the silence. Wind through the walkway, the distant sound of the bass continuing its mourning, indifferent to the particular shape of what was unfolding in the covered corridor. There's a dead drop location, she said. Northeast ridge, the box canyon we used for the LZ. On the south wall, third boulder from the west end, there's a notch at knee height. Waterproof case. Keller took out the notepad from his vest pocket and wrote it down in the compressed field shorthand that wouldn't mean anything to anyone who didn't know the key. That case has everything, she said. Fire mission authentication, transmission records. A log I've kept since Greyhound of every contact, every operation, every piece of command activity that connects back to the original decision. A pause. 6 years of it. I'll get someone to the location, he said. Don't go yourself, they're watching you. I know. Keller. He waited. The 7 people who died in Greyhound. Their families were told they were killed by enemy action, that it was clean, that it was fast, that it was in the line of duty. A pause long enough that the static had space to breathe. It wasn't any of those things. He held the radio. I know, he said again, quieter. They deserve the record to reflect what actually happened. They will, he said. I promise you. The carrier wave held for a moment longer, then, don't make promises on dead frequencies, Captain. Make them in rooms where people can hold you to them. The channel clicked off. He stood in the covered walkway for a moment in the thin winter light, handset at his side, listening to the bass sounds around him. Generators. Vehicles. The distant clatter of the chow hall. The ordinary noise of a military installation operating in the aftermath of an operation that had produced casualties and questions, and a general who was currently in a conference room preparing to conduct a review he planned to control. He put the handset in his vest. He thought about the dead drop, about who he could send to a box canyon in the mountains that was currently the site of last night's extraction, covered in evidence of the firefight, accessible only through the mountain pass that had taken his unit 4 hours to traverse. Someone fit, someone trusted, someone Holt's people weren't watching. Chen. It would have to be Chen. He started walking toward the communications section. He was halfway there when Carver fell into step beside him. Not from behind. From a side corridor precisely timed, the geometry of an interception that had been planned. Carver walked at his pace, close, but not crowding, looking straight ahead. The review starts at 1400, Carver said. I know. Holt's going to ask you directly about the frequency, about who was on it. A pause. He's going to want a name. I imagine he will. Keller. Carver stopped walking. His voice had dropped, the same register as the almost warning on the medevac pad. I've been in his orbit for 4 years. I've done things I'm not. I've done things. He stopped. Started again. Last night I pulled your patrol schedule because he told me to. I was told it was a counterintelligence operation, that you were the subject of a security investigation. A pause. I believed him. Keller stopped walking. He turned to look at Carver. The Major's face was doing something that a man with Carver's training and career investment almost never allowed his face to do in a professional setting. It was showing exactly what was happening inside it. You didn't know what it was for, Keller said carefully. I didn't know what it was for. His jaw was tight. When the firebase went down and I heard your CASEVAC request on the net, I understood what I'd done. A pause. I've been trying to figure out how to... Is this why you sent me to Ashford's office this morning? To get me away from Varda's documents? The muscles in Carver's jaw worked. Yes, he said. Silence. But I didn't destroy them, he said. I could have. I saw what was on the desk, and I could have taken the folder, and it would have been gone before you got back. Why didn't you? He looked at Keller with the expression of a man who has run out of answers that he's comfortable giving. 22 soldiers came home in body bags from Firebase Kestrel, he said, before yours made it out. A pause. 22. Keller looked at him. The review, he said. 1400. Yes. I'm going to tell Holt exactly what happened. Every tactical decision, every piece of intelligence that informed it, every action taken. He paused. I'm going to be completely honest about everything. Carver looked at him. Something in the way Keller had said completely honest had registered. The specific emphasis of a man who knows that honesty can be deployed as a weapon. And the access logs, Keller said. Carver closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Theater JAG has them, Keller said. As of this morning. Carver opened his eyes. He looked at Keller for a long moment. His face was doing the processing of a man who has just received information that reorganizes the entire tactical landscape of his situation, who is running the calculation of what it means and what his options are from this point forward. Then, Carver said slowly, I should probably request to speak with JAG directly. Yes, Keller said, you should. Before 1400. Before 1400 would be my recommendation. Carver nodded once. The tight, formal nod of a man executing a decision. He turned and walked in the direction of the legal section. Keller watched him go, then turned back toward the communications section, and as he walked, he was doing the arithmetic of the afternoon, Bersul. The review at 1400, Varda's transmission already in transit, Carver walking toward JAG, the dead drop in the box canyon containing 6 years of documentation that changed the shape of everything. He thought about Lena Cortez's voice on the frequency, still working on it. The cold air bit through his uniform. He kept walking. Chen left for the mountains at 11:40. Keller had given him the location in field shorthand, spoken once, quietly, in the communications section with the door closed and no written record. Chen had listened without asking unnecessary questions, which was the quality Keller had been counting on. He'd requisitioned a vehicle under the cover of a routine resupply run to the forward observation post. Legitimate enough on paper, the kind of errand that didn't draw attention on a busy post-operation morning, and he'd driven out through the main gate at a pace that communicated nothing in particular. Keller watched the vehicle leave from the window of the communications section, then turned back to the work of the next 2 hours. The review was at 1400. It was now 11:53. He had 2 hours and 7 minutes to prepare for a formal proceeding conducted by the man who had ordered the deaths of 7 soldiers 6 years ago and spent the intervening period ensuring that the record reflected something different. 2 hours and 7 minutes to organize everything he knew into a form that could be delivered in that room in a way that Holt could not simply dismiss or redirect or absorb into the machinery of institutional authority and make disappear. He sat at the terminal and wrote. Not a report. He had already filed the sanitized version of his after-action through the standard channels. What he wrote now was a complete account. Every tactical decision from the moment the firebase fell to the moment Raven 4 lifted from the box canyon, with full context for each decision, including the context he'd withheld from every previous account. The sealed frequency. Echo 7's tactical guidance. The warning about Rally Point Zulu. The precision of the ambush. The access log evidence Varda had found. Carver's confirmation. All of it. He wrote it in the plain declarative language of a formal military statement, the kind of language that was designed to be read into a record and survive subsequent attempts at reinterpretation. And when he was finished, he printed 2 copies and put one in his vest pocket and sealed the other in an envelope addressed to the theater JAG office, with a note attached requesting it be associated with Varda's earlier transmission. He gave the envelope to the duty clerk with instructions to send it through the secure mail system. The duty clerk, a young specialist who had not been awake long enough to have opinions about anything, took the envelope and logged it without comment. That was the redundancy. Varda's transmission, Carver's statement, and now this. 3 separate channels, 3 separate records, all describing the same chain of events from 3 independent perspectives. Holt could manage 1. He could possibly manage 2. 3 simultaneous channels, all pointing at the same documentation, all already in the possession of an authority outside his command. That was a different problem. That was the kind of problem that didn't get managed. That got investigated. Torres found him at 12:30 in the chow hall, where he was eating with the mechanical efficiency of a man fueling a machine he intended to run hard in the next several hours. She sat across from him with coffee and nothing else, and looked at him with the expression she used when she had processed something and arrived at a conclusion. Varda told me, she said. How is she? Steady. Torres wrapped her hands around the coffee. She sent the transmission at 11:15. Jag acknowledged receipt at 11:52. A pause. She's been summoned to Holt's pre-review briefing at 13:30. That's early. That's deliberate. Torres looked at her coffee. He knows. He knows something moved. He may not know what or how much. Keller set down his fork. It doesn't matter. The documentation is outside his reach now. Whatever he does in the next 2 hours, he's doing it with the materials already in Jag's possession. He could still bury the review. He can try. Keller paused. That's all he can do now, try. Torres was quiet for a moment. Yamamoto is asking to attend the review, she said. As a witness. He filed a formal request this morning. Keller looked up. His leg, he filed from the medical bed. The form was witnessed by Hendricks, who apparently dictated the supporting statement from his post-surgery recovery. She paused. Diaz also filed. Chen is currently driving through a mountain pass, so. A pause. The other 11 who were ambulatory filed as a group submission. Keller looked at his tray for a moment. They can't all attend, he said. No, but the filings are in the record. Torres met his eyes. Every one of them put their name on a document requesting to testify about what happened at Firebase Kestrel. She paused. That's not nothing. No, he said. It's not. He thought about the trench, the tracer line through the storm. 18 people sprinting through the gap in an enemy line toward a burning phosphorus marker that pointed toward a tree line they couldn't see, following a voice they didn't know toward a direction that should have been impossible. Sometimes trust is not a rational calculation. Sometimes it's the thing you choose when rational calculation has run out of road. "Let's go," he said. "What?" The review convened at 1400 in the main conference room of the command building, a room designed for briefings with a long table and chairs for 10 and a projection screen at the far end that displayed nothing. Holt sat at the head of the table, Ashford to his right, Hollis and Park from the IG to his left. Two other officers Keller didn't recognize sat further down. Legal representatives based on their insignia, though which legal authority they represented was not immediately clear. Keller sat at the far end of the table. Torres sat beside him. She had requested and been granted observer status, which Holt had permitted with the equanimity of a man who could afford to permit small gestures. Varda was not in the room. Keller noted the absence and filed it. Holt opened the review with the practiced smoothness of someone who had run many of these proceedings, which he had. 31 years of operational reviews, after-action boards, formal inquiries, all of which had presumably gone the way he needed them to go. He framed the review's scope efficiently. The firebase loss, the extraction, the questions of tactical decision-making and command authority, and then he turned to Keller. "Captain Keller, let's begin with the firebase defense. Walk us through the initial contact." Keller walked him through it. He was thorough and precise and entirely unembellished. Every contact report, every tactical decision, every moment of the defense, from initial enemy engagement through the collapse of the perimeter. He used the language of an officer providing a formal military account, which was the language of specificity and sequence, and he gave Holt nothing to question because there was nothing to question. The defense of Firebase Kestrel had been conducted correctly under impossible conditions, and Keller had no reason to qualify any of it. Holt listened, took notes, asked clarifying questions about timing and positioning that were legitimate questions, the kind that belonged in a genuine inquiry, and Keller answered all of them. Then, "The extraction. You decided not to use Rally Point Zulu." "Correct." "Based on what assessment?" "Based on intelligence from a field source indicating the LZ was compromised, corroborated by the tactical pattern of the enemy's operational setup." A pause. "The ambush was too precisely timed to the window of our maximum vulnerability. The enemy knew our patrol schedule. Rally Point Zulu was the authorized extraction point under that schedule. Using it would have put my unit directly into a prepared kill zone." Holt made a note. His face was composed. "And this field source, the voice on the unauthorized frequency?" "Yes, sir." "You have no identification for this individual?" "I have an assessment, sir. I believe the individual was a former military asset with specific familiarity with the operational theater." "Belief," Holt said, with the precision of a man identifying an imprecision. "Not confirmed identification." "Not confirmed?" "No." "And you made the decision to bypass the authorized extraction point, a decision with significant command authority implications, based on an unconfirmed field contact." "I made the decision based on all available tactical intelligence, of which the field contact was one element." "But the determining element," Keller paused, held Holt's gaze. "When the alternative is leading my people into a kill box, sir, yes, it was the determining element." The room was quiet for a moment. Hollis was writing. Park was watching Keller with the same attentive neutrality as before. Holt moved on. Questions about the movement through the mountains, the secondary LZ coordinates, the radio battery removal. Keller answered everything. His account was complete and consistent, and he did not offer information beyond what was asked, which was a discipline he'd learned over 16 years and which served him now. Then Holt set down his pen. "Captain Keller," he said. His voice had changed slightly, not dramatically, but the geniality had been put away. What was left was professional and direct, and carried the weight of the star on his collar. "I want to ask you about something outside the immediate operational account." "Sir?" "It's come to my attention that this morning, prior to this review, You engaged in a series of informal inquiries regarding personnel records and classified operational documentation. A pause. Specifically, regarding an operation designated Greyhound. The room was very still. Yes, sir, Keller said. You accessed records above your clearance level. I accessed the records available to me. I asked another officer with appropriate clearance to access material above mine. Captain Varda. Yes, sir. And based on what you found in those records, you drew conclusions about the nature of the Firebase Kestrel ambush. Based on what I found, yes. Holt leaned forward slightly. Captain, I want to be transparent with you. The concerns you've raised about the integrity of the patrol schedule, about potential compromises in the command structure, those concerns are noted. They will be investigated through appropriate channels. He paused. But the investigation of Operation Greyhound is a classified matter and is not within the scope of this review. I understand, sir. Keller paused. I'd like to note for the record that I've filed a complete written account of last night's operation, including all intelligence that informed my tactical decisions, with the Theater Judge Advocate General's office. Silence. A different quality of silence from the ones before it. Not the silence of a proceeding pausing to absorb information, but the silence of a room in which several people are recalibrating simultaneously. Holt's composure held. It was a remarkable thing to watch. 31 years of institutional practice maintaining a surface that showed almost nothing. But Keller had been watching his face for 90 minutes, and he saw the fractional compression around his eyes, the micro-adjustment of the muscles around his mouth. That filing, Holt said carefully, was not authorized through proper command channels. No, sir. Given that the command channels may themselves be subjects of the account, I assessed that direct filing was appropriate. A pause. The JAG office acknowledged receipt at 11:52 this morning. The two unfamiliar legal officers at the far end of the table exchanged a look. Hollis stopped writing and looked at Park. Ashford, who had been still at Holt's right through the entire proceeding, moved for the first time. Not dramatically, just a small shift in posture, a reorientation of her body toward the center of the table. General Holt, she said, and her voice was perfectly even. Given the captain's statement regarding the JAG filing, I believe the scope of this review may need to be reconsidered. Holt looked at her. That look lasted 2 seconds. It contained, in Keller's assessment, the entire history of whatever relationship existed between those two people, the relative authority and the long habit of deference, and whatever was now, in this moment, departing from that habit. Colonel Ashford, the review should be suspended pending coordination with Theater JAG, she said. Standard protocol when a JAG filing exists, concurrent with a command review of the same events. The room was quiet. One of the unfamiliar legal officers said quietly to the other, "She's correct. It's regulatory." Holt sat back. He looked at the table for a moment, then at Keller. The mask was completely intact, but it was doing something different now. It was the mask of a man who has assessed his position and found it changed, who is running the calculation of next steps from a fundamentally altered starting point. "Suspend the review," he said. His voice was entirely level. "Pending JAG coordination." He stood. He gathered his folder. He walked to the door with the unhurried bearing of a man who is in complete control, and Keller watched him and understood that what he was watching was not retreat, but repositioning. Holt was a man who had survived 31 years by knowing when to move and in which direction, and he was moving now. But the documentation was already at JAG. Carver's statement was already at JAG. The access logs were already at JAG. And in a box canyon, in the mountains northeast of FOB Harlow, Chen was either already at the south wall or was 40 minutes away from it, and the waterproof case behind the third boulder from the west end had been there for 6 years, waiting for exactly this moment. The door closed behind Holt. No one in the room moved for a moment. Then Ashford looked at Keller, and the thing in her expression that had been unresolved since the first moment he'd walked into her office that morning had resolved completely. It was not warmth exactly. She was not a woman who did warmth in professional settings, but it was something real, something that had made its decision and was done weighing. "Get something to eat, Captain," she said. It's going to be a long afternoon, Deb. Chen called at 16:20. Keller was in Varda's office. She had not been at the review because Holt had sent her to a briefing that was specifically scheduled to occupy her during the review, a move that had failed to matter once the review was suspended. And Chen's voice on the line was the voice of a man who has done something difficult and is reporting with precision, because precision is the tool available to him. "I found it," Chen said. "Location confirmed?" "Third boulder, knee height, notch on the eastern face, waterproof Pelican case, combination lock, 4 digits. A pause. "She sent the combination on the frequency this morning. I'm looking at the contents." "Describe them." A pause while Chen assessed what he was looking at. A fire mission authentication document with a general's authentication code and a timestamp. His voice was controlled. A radio transmission log showing a message acknowledging recon team presence in the strike grid. The message timestamp is 31 minutes before the strike. A pause. A handwritten journal. It looks... He stopped. It looks like it covers several years, multiple entries, dates, locations, observations, names. Names. A lot of names. A pause. "Keller, this is very thorough. Photograph every page, every document, upload to the secure server immediately." A pause. "Then bring the originals back. Do not stop anywhere. Come directly to the base." "Yes, sir." "Chen." "Sir." "Good work." A pause. "She did the work," Chen said quietly. "I just drove to pick it up." The line closed. Keller set the phone down. He looked at Varda, who had heard enough of the call to understand what it meant. 6 years, she said. 6 years. She looked at the wall for a moment. Every page of that journal is going to be a timeline of what she watched him do, what she watched this command structure do. A pause. While everyone assumed she was dead. Yes, the families of the Greyhound personnel. Her voice was very controlled. They've been living with the official account for 6 years. Not for much longer. The photographs began arriving on the secure server at 16:47. Keller and Varda went through them together. The fire mission authentication first, then the transmission log, then the journal entries. Varda's background gave her the analytical framework to move quickly, to identify the most operationally significant entries and flag them, to build the structure of what the documentation proved in the language that a formal legal proceeding would require. They worked through the evening. At 1900, Theodore Jagg contacted FOB Harlow directly. Not through the command net, a direct line to Ashford's office, which Ashford relayed to Varda with a brevity that suggested she had been expecting it and had prepared her response in advance. Theodore Jagg was sending a team. Arrival? 0600 the following morning. At 2100, Keller received word through Ashford that Brigadier General Warren Holt had been placed on administrative hold pending a theater-level investigation into potential violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The specific charges were not yet filed. That would come after JAG reviewed the full documentation. But the administrative hold meant he was confined to quarters, his command authority suspended, his access to communication systems restricted. It was not an arrest, not yet, but it was the machinery starting. Keller sat in the communications section alone for a while after that, with the PRC unit on the table in front of him and the sealed frequency open on the display, and he held the handset for a long time before he pressed the button. Echo 7. He paused. It's done. Holt is on administrative hold. Jag arrives in the morning. Chen retrieved the documentation, all of it. It's in the system now, outside anyone's ability to suppress. He paused. It's going to take time. Investigations take time. But the record is going to reflect what actually happened. Greyhound is going to be opened. Another pause. You did this. 6 years of it. All of it. He stopped. He looked at the wall. I'd like very much to have this conversation somewhere other than a dead frequency. A pause. If you're willing. Static. He sat with it. Then the carrier wave. Where? One word, but it was there. She was there. FOB Harlow, he said. Tomorrow, after JAG arrives. You'd be a witness, not a suspect. Varda has already filed the documentation establishing your status as a surviving victim of the Greyhound incident. A pause. You'd be coming in as a witness with evidence, not as a ghost. A longer pause. That's a significant ask. I know. The last time I came in from the field, they erased me. The last time Holt was in a position to do that. Keller held the radio. He's not anymore. The people who are coming tomorrow morning have everything. Your documentation, the access logs, Carver's statement, my account, Varda's analysis. They're not coming to manage a narrative. They're coming because the narrative is already out and they have to respond to it. A pause. You've been alone with this for 6 years. You don't have to be anymore. The static held. The communications section was very quiet. Outside, the base had settled into its night rhythm. Generators, distant vehicle movement, the muted constant of an installation that never fully slept. There are conditions, she said. He almost smiled. State them. The Greyhound personnel files are corrected. All 7. Official record reflects what actually happened, not the cover story. I'll make sure of it. The families are notified personally, not a form letter. Someone who knows what happened and can answer their questions. I'll be there for every one of them, if that's what it takes. A pause. And I want my service record restored. He held the handset. You were a staff sergeant when Greyhound happened, he said. Based on your performance last night alone, the question of what rank you should hold after reinstatement is something I would personally advocate for in front of any board you want to put in front of me. Silence for a moment. Keller. Yes. I'm not doing this for reinstatement. I know. I'm doing this because 7 people deserve to have the truth on record, because their families deserve to know their people didn't die for a mistake, because... She stopped. The static held the incomplete sentence. Then, because I'm tired. The word landed quietly and with enormous weight. Not the tiredness of exhaustion, though there was surely that. 6 years of mountain winters and solitude and the particular grinding fatigue of carrying something that no one around you can see. The tiredness of a person who has maintained a vigil for so long that the vigil has become indistinguishable from who they are and who is ready, perhaps for the first time, to put it down. Come in, Keller said. Let someone else carry it for a while. Another long silence. Oh, 600, she said. When Jag arrives. I'll be at the gate. Don't make a thing of it. Just the gate. Nobody else. And coffee. Done. The channel clicked. He sat with the static for a moment longer, the way he had on the helicopter flight back, keeping the frequency open as if it were a thread connecting him to something that might otherwise drift away. Then he set the handset down and sat back and let the silence of the communications section sit with him for a while. Chen returned at 22:30 with the Pelican case and a look on his face that would require a long time and probably several drinks to fully articulate. He set the case on the table without comment, and Keller logged it into evidence, and they sat in the communications section for a while, not saying much, which seemed appropriate. Torres came by at 2300. She stood in the doorway and looked at the case and looked at Keller and said, Tomorrow? Oh, 600, he said. She's coming in. Torres was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression, not surprise, but a kind of deep, sustained relief. The relief of someone who had been hoping for an outcome and had not been sure of it until now. Does she know what she's walking into? Torres asked. She knows better than any of us, he said. Torres nodded. She looked at the case one more time. I'll be at the gate, she said. I told her just me. I heard you. Torres looked at him. I'll be at the gate anyway. She can tell me to leave if she wants. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said. The JAG team arrived at 0550, 10 minutes ahead of schedule, which JAG teams tended to do because they were lawyers, and lawyers manage time as a professional courtesy to themselves. 4 of them, 2 attorneys, an investigator, and a documentation specialist, stepping off a helicopter onto the medevac pad with the purposeful efficiency of people who understood exactly why they were there and were prepared for it. Ashford met them at the pad. Keller stood at the main gate with Torres and 2 cups of coffee that were already going cold in the morning air. The sky was the dark gray of very early winter dawn, The stars fading at the edges, the mountains in the distance a black shape against a slightly lighter sky. 0600 came. 0605. Torres said nothing. She was very good at saying nothing when saying nothing was the appropriate response to a situation. 0610. Keller was looking at the road that led from the mountain pass to the gate. The same road Chen had driven yesterday. The same road that fed down from the terrain where the box canyon was, where Firebase Kestrel had been, where the night had started in a frozen trench with ammunition running out and a radio that reached nothing. A vehicle appeared at the far end of the road. It was moving slowly, not the pace of a vehicle with a specific destination and a schedule, the pace of something that was navigating carefully, that was approaching something it had been away from for a long time and was not entirely sure how to approach. The vehicle stopped 50 meters from the gate. A figure got out. She was not what Keller had assembled in his mind from the photograph in the personnel file and the voice on the frequency. Or she was, but the photograph and the voice hadn't been enough information. She was compact and dark-haired and moved with the particular economy of someone whose body had been maintained as a tool for a long time. And she was wearing civilian clothes that were clearly field functional. And she was carrying nothing except a pack over one shoulder and the long case of a rifle that she set down against the vehicle before she walked toward the gate. She stopped 10 feet away. She looked at Keller, then at Torres, then back at Keller. "I said just you," she said. "She wouldn't leave," Keller said. A beat. Torres held out a coffee cup. Lena Cortez looked at it for a moment. Something moved through her face. A ripple in the controlled surface. There and gone. She took the cup. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at the base through the gate, at the lights and the structures and the flag above the command building catching the first movement of the morning wind. 6 years, she said, to no one in particular. "Yes," Keller said. She was quiet for a moment, drinking the coffee, looking at the base with the expression of someone returning to a language they haven't spoken in a long time, testing whether it still fits in their mouth. "How's Hendricks?" she said. "They saved the arm," Torres said. "He's going to physical therapy in about 6 weeks. He specifically requested that his PT be someone who won't let him quit." A pause. "I told him that could be arranged." Lena looked at Torres. "You're Sergeant Torres," she said. "How do you—" "I've been listening to your unit for a while." She almost smiled. "You have a good voice for radio. Clear." Torres looked at her for a moment, then looked at Keller, then looked back at Lena. "Thank you," Torres said, "for all of it." Lena looked at the coffee in her hands. The almost smile faded into something quieter and more complex. The expression of someone who has been thanked for something they did not do for the purpose of being thanked. "The JAG team is inside," Keller said. "Ashford's hosting them in the conference room. Varda has the documentation organized." He paused. "When you're ready." She looked up at him. "Keller," she said. "Yes." "The 7. She held his gaze. "Their families first, before any of the institutional process, before the filings and the hearings and the record corrections. The families first." "Agreed," he said. "I want to be there when they're told." "I'll make sure of it." She nodded. She turned to look at the mountains one more time. The dark shapes of the ridgelines against the lightning sky, the high terrain she had moved through alone for 6 years, the landscape that had hidden her and sheltered her and given her the distance from which to watch and record and wait. She looked at it for a long time, then she turned back to the gate. "All right," she said. "Let's go." Then, what followed was not clean or fast or cinematically satisfying in the way that the previous 24 hours had been. Institutional accountability never is. It is paperwork and depositions and careful procedural language and months of process that move with the deliberate pace of a system correcting itself, which is a pace that bears no relationship to the pace of the events that made correction necessary. Warren Holt was formally charged at the theater level 11 days after JAG arrived at FOB Harlow. The charges included dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, and violations of the UCMJ relating to the unlawful targeting of friendly forces during Operation Greyhound. His star was suspended pending the proceedings. The proceedings took 9 months. At the end of them, the star was removed. Major Carver cooperated fully with the investigation. His cooperation was a matter of record, and the investigation noted it. And what resulted from that notation was a legal and institutional outcome that was less than what full accountability might have demanded, and more than what would have happened if he had not walked toward the legal section that morning. He spent considerable time examining that arithmetic. The 7 Greyhound personnel were formally and publicly recognized 11 weeks after Jag's arrival. The ceremony was small, not by design, but because the families, when contacted, had asked for something small, something that was about their people rather than about the institution correcting itself. Keller attended. Torres attended. Varda attended. Lena Cortez attended, and she stood at the side of the room and said nothing during the ceremony, except when she spoke directly to each family, which she did quietly and specifically, telling each one something particular about the person they had lost, something that only someone who had been there could tell them. None of the families had known she existed. None of them had known that someone had survived and watched and carried the truth for 6 years and then handed it to the people who could act on it. Several of them asked her why she had waited so long. She told each of them the same thing. I wasn't waiting. I was preparing. The difference between waiting and preparing, she said, was that waiting was passive and preparation was not. She had been building the case every day for 6 years, making sure that when the moment came, nothing could be suppressed or dismissed or managed away. She had been right about that. Lena Cortez was reinstated to active service in the month following the Greyhound recognition ceremony. The board that reviewed her case moved quickly, which boards did not typically do, and the speed was attributable to several factors including the documentation she had provided, the testimony of Captain Keller, and the assessment filed by Colonel Ashford, who had spent considerable time in the intervening weeks reading everything and had arrived at conclusions she committed to paper with the same precision she brought to everything. The rank question was addressed at the board with the directness that the documentation warranted. The board noted in its findings that the performance record preceding Greyhound had been exceptional, that the 6-year period following Greyhound, while unofficial, had produced intelligence and tactical support that contributed directly to the survival of 18 military personnel, and that the skill level demonstrated throughout warranted recognition. The rank offered was Sergeant Major. Lena sat in the boardroom and looked at the document for a long moment before she signed it. The officer who handed her the document said, "Is the rank acceptable?" She looked at him. "The rank is fine," she said. "I want to know what unit." Keller was in his office, the real one, back at his permanent assignment, 3 weeks after FOB Harlow, 2 weeks after the Greyhound ceremony. So, when the knock came at the door, "Come in," he said. The door opened. He looked up. She was in uniform, which he had not yet seen. The uniform changed things slightly. Not her bearing, which was the same, or the particular quality of her stillness, which was unchanged, but it made her simultaneously more familiar and more strange, the institutional language of it sitting on the person he'd first encountered as a voice in a blizzard. She sat in the chair across from his desk. "Sergeant Major," he said. "Captain," she said. They looked at each other for a moment. "How's the transition?" he asked. "Strange." She looked at the wall. Everything moved slowly compared to the mountains. Everything moved slowly compared to... She stopped. "People talk a lot." "They do. In the mountains, things are very clear. You have a problem, and you solve it, and you move." She paused. "Here, everything takes 4 meetings and a memo." "Welcome back." She almost smiled, the almost smile he'd seen at the gate, the one that arrived and departed quickly, that was still learning to stay. "I've been assigned to the recon training unit," she said. "Apparently there's a skills gap in long-range precision work, and someone with my profile is considered a useful resource." A pause. "I'm going to be teaching." "Good. I've never taught anyone anything in my life." "You taught 18 people to survive a blizzard by following a voice on a dead frequency." She looked at him. "That's different." "Is it?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at his desk, at the organized stacks of paperwork that represented the ongoing administrative life of a military career, and he could see her assessing the landscape of it, the geography of an institutional existence, ordinary and constrained, and nothing like a ridgeline with a clear angle of fire and 40 enemy soldiers below. "Are you going to be all right?" he said. "With the transition?" "I don't know." She said it simply, without drama. "I know how to be alone in the mountains. I know how to move and observe and wait and act at exactly the right moment. I know how to keep people alive when the only tool available is a rifle and a radio." She paused. "I don't know how to be this." A gesture, vague and comprehensive, that encompassed the uniform and the rank and the institution and the ordinary day around them. "I used to. I'll have to learn it again." "You will. You sound certain." "You spent 6 years alone in the mountains conducting a one-person intelligence operation against a general officer who had the entire institutional machinery of the military on his side," Keller said. "And you won. I have a reasonable confidence in your ability to figure out a training curriculum." She looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that doesn't have time to be controlled before it happens. It changed her face completely, not into something unrecognizable, but into something that was the same person with a different layer visible, a layer that had been present all along but sealed off by 6 years of solitude and vigilance and the specific emotional discipline required to do what she had done. It was the laugh of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has put it down and discovered that her hands are still there. "All right," she said. She stood. She looked at him with the directness that was, he understood now, simply the way she looked at everything, without the social performance of managed eye contact, without the strategic ambiguity of people who had learned to say more with what they didn't show than what they did, just direct, clear, present. "Thank you," she said, "for the frequency." He shook his head. "You answered. You called." They looked at each other. "If you need anything," he said, "the transition, the training unit, any of it, I know where to find you." She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Keller." "Yes." "The frequency." She looked back at him. "Keep the hardware." He looked at her. "In case someone needs it," she said. She left. He sat in his office for a while after that, in the ordinary silence of an ordinary afternoon, and he thought about dead frequencies and live ones and the thin line between them, and about the particular kind of courage required not to fire a weapon or breach a perimeter or hold a position under fire, but to answer. To simply answer when everything in a reasonable person's calculation says the call is coming from somewhere you cannot afford to be, and the cost of answering is everything you have, and you answer anyway. Some people carry things alone for so long that the carrying becomes who they are. What Lena Cortez had done, the 6 years, the journal, the case she'd built with the patience of someone who understood that truth deferred was not truth destroyed, was not the act of someone waiting to be rescued. It was the act of someone who had decided that if rescue was coming, she would have to build the conditions for it herself. She had built them. And when the call finally came through the static, she had answered. Not because she had nothing left to lose, but because some things are worth answering for, even when the cost is everything. And the people who understand that are the ones who make it possible for everyone else to come home.